What distinguishes Broadcasting Scotland from a website or blog, apart from our brilliant programmes?
Hi there, I'm Gordon Ross.
Are the costs we face to enable us to produce those programmes. These costs are significant and ongoing. However, our facilities are able to do so much more if only we had the staff. In the last year, some of our supporters have cancelled their subscriptions. In one way, we would prefer it if it was because they didn't like us, rather than it being because of the financial pressures which we are all under because of COVID. The really positive outcome of our fundraiser is that at a time of economic challenge in Scotland, we will use your donations to create jobs and in a small way contribute to improving the Scottish economy. If you want us to be Scotland's independent broadcaster, able to provide an alternative mainstream television platform, then please support us.
Scotland is going to be an independent country.
Just imagine what we could do if we had even 1% of the BBC Scotland channel's budget. Imagine. And then please consider turning your imagination into reality. Please support us if you can afford it.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can I remind members that social distancing measures are in place in the chamber and right across the campus. Would members please take care to observe these, including when entering and exiting the chamber. And the next item of business is portfolio questions, and the first portfolio is education and skills. Would those members who wish to ask a supplementary question please press the request to speak button or indicate in the chat function if you're joining us remotely. Question number 1, Johann Lamont.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what analysis it has carried out of the number of school pupils in Glasgow experiencing digital exclusion.
John Swinney.
So the Scottish Government worked with local authorities through COSLA, the Society of Local Authorities Chief Executives and the Association of Directors of Education to establish the scale of need across Scotland. Councils and schools know their learners and families best. Therefore, funding of £25 million was allocated via a formula based on deprivation and rurality for them to address local need. Glasgow City Council received £3.1 million, through which they have distributed 7,240 devices and 4,225 connectivity packages to learners. The Council have received an additional £5.8 million to further support remote learning, which can be used flexibly to deliver additional devices or connectivity where need still exists.
Johann Lamont.
Thank you. At a recent meeting of Glasgow City Council's Education Committee, it was revealed that more than 1/3 of primary 1 to 6 pupils in Glasgow identified as needing a digital device for home learning, and they still do not have access to one. Digital exclusion amongst disadvantaged children and young people was already a significant problem before lockdown and remote learning. However, the pandemic has compounded this. I'm sure the Minister will agree that it's entirely unacceptable that 1 year after lockdown, children still do not have access to the devices they need in order to learn. This is not a bonus, but central to their learning. What action can the Government further take to address digital exclusion and ensure young people, including the 35% of Glasgow primary school children identified, do not fall through the net? And how will the Scottish Government focus attention more broadly on this most vulnerable group of young people whose life chances have been very clearly disproportionately affected by the COVID crisis?
John Swinney.
Presiding Officer, I fundamentally agree with the direction of Johann Lamont's question. I do believe that we are now in an era where the the use of a digital device is now central to the effective participation of children and young people in education. And obviously the government has taken a number of significant steps to enhance the propositions that have already been in place from local authorities. Indeed, Glasgow City Council has a strong record of the provision of devices to young people within its education system. Some other local authorities have opted to provide devices to all pupils, for example, in the Scottish Borders Council. So certainly one of the priorities that the government has pursued throughout the pandemic to address that digital divide through the work that I've recounted in my earlier answer, and also through the work on Connecting Scotland, which has been taken forward by my Cabinet colleague, the Community Secretary, Aileen Campbell. It remains a significant priority for the government, and it's one that we will pursue actively should the government be re-elected in May.
Supplementary from Clare Adamson.
Beg your pardon, sorry, that was for a question.
I would have thought you'd have known by now. Okay, question number 2, please, Sandra White.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what recent discussions it's had with Glasgow City Council regarding the provision of Gaelic medium education.
John Swinney.
The Scottish Government has regular discussions with Glasgow City Council on matters relating to Gaelic medium education, and we've been delighted to support the expansion of provision within the city. This month, my officials met with Glasgow City Council staff and discussed the Council's management of the P1 and P2 entry, Gaelic probationers, and the support that can be offered to the high proportion of parents who do not speak Gaelic at home.
Sandra White.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that very encouraging answer. It is my understanding that GCC have, or Glasgow City Council, sorry, has 140 GME places available. However, to date, 170 applications have been received, which is also extremely encouraging but disappointing. Can the Cabinet Secretary provide assurances and support to ensure that those who seek to place their children within Gaelic medium education in Glasgow will have the opportunity to do so?
John Swinney.
Presiding Officer, there's a lot of encouraging news in the work that Glasgow City Council is undertaking to support Gaelic medium education. The City Council has reached another high this year with around 160 primary ones seeking entry. Now, the Council often finds there is a drop-off in applications before places are taken up, but obviously the expansion of the City Council's Gaelic medium education estate from 3 primary schools to 4, a 4th school is being supported by the Scottish Government, will obviously, I hope, give reassurance to Sandra White and her constituents that there is further expansion of Gaelic medium education planned within the City Council. And I want to pay tribute to the City Council for the energy and commitment that they have given to this important policy objective. Lastly, President Officer, let me say that this will be the first time the last time that I respond to a question from my dear friend Sandra White, and I wish her well on her retirement from Parliament.
Question number 3 is Neil Bibby.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what resources it has provided for investment in the West College Scotland campus.
Richard Lockhead.
Since financial year 2014-15, there has been an investment of £20,650,274 in the West College Scotland campus.
Neil Bibby.
I thank the Minister for that answer. West College Scotland has not received its fair share of investment for years, and the college capital budget is being cut. As far back as 2017, the Scottish Funding Council Estate Survey identified the need for significant investment in both Paisley and Greenock campuses and the potential of plans for new fit-for-purpose buildings. The Scottish Government's infrastructure strategy to 2025 does not give any indication at all that there will be funding for estate development in Paisley or Greenock. So can I ask the Minister, when will the Scottish Government invest in a modern campus for West College Scotland students in my region?
Richard Lockhead.
Can I just assure Neil Bibby that the Scottish Funding Council considers securing funding for the replacement of the campuses at West College Scotland is very much a high priority, and indeed more resources were given to the college in recent times to progress their outlined business case for those improvements. I think it's well documented that capital budgets have been under pressure for many years now, and that's recognised, but it's certainly the case that we do believe that the college does have a strong case, and as soon as the resources become available and the outline business case progresses, hopefully further progress can be made.
I have supplementaries from Stuart McMillan and Jamie Green. Stuart McMillan.
For the final time, thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I've met with West College Scotland and also been in correspondence with the Scottish Funding Council about the proposed new campus in Greenock. Can the Minister provide an assurance that every effort will be made to assist West College Scotland, provide a facility for future generations, which can also help stem the population decline that Inverclyde has had over the last 30 years and continues to face?
Richard Lockhead.
Well, Stuart McMillan is perfectly correct to highlight the important role that West College Scotland plays in the local economy and the local region. And I do hope that the next Parliament and the next Government continue to treat this college as a priority in terms of the outlined business case for improving the campuses. And as I indicated in my previous answer, that further funding has been made available in recent times to take forward that business case. The SFC is also developing a medium-term estate strategy for the college sector, and I'm sure that West College Scotland will have a prominent place within that.
Jamie Green.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I should declare an interest as a alumni of what is now West College Scotland in Greenock. The next Parliament will see the 10-year anniversary of what has become college regionalisation. Obviously, it's subject to whoever it does form the next government, but will the Minister and other members ensure this Parliament scrutinises to make sure that that piece of work has indeed resulted in the anticipated reality of what was expected of the regionalisation programme?
Richard Lockhead.
Yeah. Well, Jamie Green, of course, is testament to the excellent college sector in the west of Scotland that we have, and he's illustrated that today with his excellent question. In terms of the role of the college regions, he will be aware that the Scottish Funding Council just now are undertaking a very fundamental major review of the cohesion and sustainability of further higher education in Scotland, and they are indeed focusing on the college regions as part of that wider project. And I think it's absolutely essential this Parliament scrutinises closely the outcome of the SFC review, because it will be so fundamental to the future of Scotland and our further higher education sector.
Question number 4, Clare Adamson.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what action it has taken to support lifelong learning and reskilling.
Jamie Hepburn.
We are investing significantly in reskilling on interventions in recognition of its important role in supporting future skills transitions, including our just transition to net zero and our economic recovery from the pandemic. This includes through our National Transition Training Fund, which supports individuals to retrain to secure more positive employment outcomes. We have recently confirmed ongoing support for the fund in 2021-22. We're also committed to develop a lifelong learning framework that will raise the importance of adult learning and ensure it's integrated within the wider education and skills system.
Clare Adamson.
Thank you. I'm sure the Minister will join me in welcoming the publication of the Comerford-Little report and the Open University in Scotland's prospectus, Skills in Scotland, both of which call for a skills-led recovery. The OU prospectus sets out a vision to galvanise higher education to support an inclusive economic recovery over the lifetime of the next Parliament. Can I ask what steps the Scottish Government is taking to ensure both higher and further education remain open and accessible to everyone throughout any stage of their life?
Jamie Hepburn.
Well, the Comerford-Little report has a very important one, which we are considering very closely. It aligns very neatly with our wider ambitions through the Future Skills Action Plan and the wider skills realignment we need to see. In relation to the Open University, as ever, they are an excellent organisation in terms of their approach to lifelong learning generally. Recently, in that regard, they've become involved in the Flex Workforce Development Fund, which I have responsibility for, which has now been opened up to small and medium enterprises, and they're leading on that element of work. In terms of the wider question, in terms of accessibility to higher education, we will, of course, continue to invest significantly in higher education this coming financial year. And in relation to accessibility, of course, one of the fundamental things that we will continue to do is retain our commitment to free university education. One of the questions at this election that's coming is, will the other parties follow suit?
Question number 5, Jamie Halcro Johnston.
To ask the Scottish Government what support it will provide to schools in light of its announcement regarding the full-time return of pupils in April.
John Swinney.
Presiding Officer, to date, we have committed over £375 million to local authorities and schools as part of education recovery. This investment continues to fund additional teachers, support staff and costs of necessary safety mitigations in schools, such as infrastructure adjustments. We are currently updating and will publish before Easter relevant guidance. I've emphasised the importance of supporting young people's wellbeing as they come back to school, and work is already in train across partners to deliver wellbeing and outdoor activities. As with all aspects of our education response to COVID, I have been grateful for the expert advice of the COVID-19 Education Recovery Group as we have formed plans for the full-time return.
Jamie Halcro Johnston.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. Since the indication of schools returns was made, there has been a less equivocal stance, particularly in relation to secondary pupils coming from the Scottish Government. So can I ask you firstly, can he confirm if he will give minimum notice period for any changes to scheduled returns after the Easter holidays to help parents and carers to plan? And can he further assure local authorities that additional costs faced because of mitigation measures that he has recognised will be essential to enable pupils to return will be adequately supported by central government rather than coming out of local education budgets?
John Swinney.
Presiding Officer, the Government's central planning assumption is that schools will return full-time for face-to-face learning after the Easter holidays, which in some parts of Scotland is on the 12th of April, in the overwhelming majority of areas of Scotland is the 19th of April. Now, of course, we have got all primary schools and early learning centres back full-time, and secondary schools are back for all pupils, but not on a full-time basis, supported by remote learning. Our objective, our central planning assumption, is to return secondary schools full-time, but we obviously must take into account the prevalence of the virus at that particular stage, and we will give as much notice as we possibly can do on the approach to return. The Education Advisory Group, which provides us with clinical advice on these issues, will meet on the 6th of April, and we will receive their views, and obviously that will influence us in the planning and steps that we take to reopen schools full-time with effect from the 12th of April in some parts of the country. On the issue of money, the Government has committed over £375 million to local authorities as part of education recovery. That is a very significant investment by the Government in the additional costs of the delivery of education at local level, and we will of course continue to discuss any issues that arise from such a substantial financial contribution by the Government with local authorities in due course.
Question number 6, Jeremy Balfour.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on what it is doing to ensure that pupils are able to catch up on any learning lost as a result of school closures.
John Swinney.
Presiding Officer, I think any focus on the term lost learning is not an appropriate description of the challenges that we face and does a disservice to the work of school staff across the country. Last week's Education Recovery Group reinforced the importance of supporting children through positive action, with a need to focus on wellbeing and learning as we move towards full-time return of school. Work is already underway to consider what support our young people might require over the summer term and the summer holiday. We are working with local authorities and Education Scotland who share this ambition, and discussions are underway to understand what strategic action is needed at the national level to support and facilitate specific and meaningful local activity in schools.
Jeremy Balfour.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his answer, but with respect, having looked at my own children, they have lost out. There are things that they have not been able to learn in the last year because of the closure, and that does need to be caught up at some point. The London School of Economics says that we need to invest millions of pounds into doing that, and we as a Conservative Party are going to fund £120 million to spread across 2 years. Can the Cabinet Secretary provide assurances that their catch-up programme will be similarly ambitious in scale and will allocate funding directly to schools who are best placed to target their funding where it is most needed.
John Swinney.
President Officer, I won't reiterate the comments I made about the language and terminology that Mr Balfour insists on using in this question. I don't think it's a particularly helpful description of the challenges that we face. I think young people have learnt a great deal over the course of lockdown. That's a tribute to their families who've supported them, to their carers, and also to their schools for supporting their learning. And I think a great deal has been accomplished through remote learning, which has supported young people adequately. I explained at length to the Education and Skills Committee this morning the importance of supporting individual learning, and the education system will ensure that is the case. In relation to the Conservative Party's plans, well, I suppose the voters will have a choice on that on May the 6th, and we'll see what they make of that. But based on the performance of the Conservative Party at the present moment and their shocking, shabby behaviour over the course of the last few weeks, I don't expect the message will attract much support from the public in Scotland.
Question number 7, James Dornan.
To ask the Scottish Government what support it is providing to assist children from the poorest backgrounds with their education.
John Swinney.
Presiding Officer, our mission to reduce the poverty-related attainment gap remains central to our plans. That is why we have committed a record £200 million to the Scottish Attainment Challenge, including the introduction of a £20 million pupil equity funding premium for 2021-22, which emerged from the budget discussions and agreement with the Liberal Democrats. We also continue to support our young people from low-income backgrounds with free school meals and the National Minimum School Clothing Grant, and of course there was expansion to the free school meals provision agreed in the budget with the Green Party. Our report on progress towards closing the poverty-related attainment gap, published on the 22nd of March, presents a strong body of evidence that shows good progress has been made towards closing the poverty-related attainment gap.
Sorry, James Dornan.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary, for that answer. Would you confirm to me that the announcement of an additional £25 million to tackle poverty and equality will not only further enhance that £100 COVID hardship payment for children and young people but receiving free school meals, but will also enable support to be extended to children who receive free lunches within the early learning and childcare settings?
John Swinney.
President, so these provisions will be in place, and it's part of the wider efforts that the Government is undertaking in a number of areas through education expenditure, but also through the wider work that we take forward in collaboration with my Cabinet colleague Aileen Campbell on in the areas of tackling child poverty, to ensure that we take a series of integrated measures to address the impact of child poverty, which of course has a significant bearing on the educational attainment of children and young people within Scotland, and as part of the Government's overall strategy to tackling the attainment gap. Presiding Officer, I'm uncertain as to whether or not you will be calling further supplementaries on this question, but at this moment, could I say this is likely to be one of the last questions that you have called me to answer as Deputy Presiding Officer, and I extend my warmest wishes to you and my grateful thanks for your for being a colleague over the last 22 years, and particularly for the long sentence that we spent in the Smith Commission together.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary, but I'm afraid you've got Ian Gray now.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and my apologies to the Cabinet Secretary for extending his sentence slightly longer, but I promise it won't be for too long. Presiding Officer, for the whole of this Parliament, the Government has had the goodwill and support of the whole Chamber in its top priority to close the poverty-related attainment gap. And this week's Audit Scotland report does show that it is true, as the Cabinet Secretary has said, that the Government has invested hundreds of millions of pounds through the Attainment Scotland Fund and otherwise to that end. Yet the same report says this, and I quote, "Progress on closing the attainment gap has been limited and falls short of the Government's aims." So as he reflects then, why is it, does the Cabinet Secretary think, that the Government has made so little progress on this, which they themselves called their sacred responsibility?
John Swinney.
Officer, it is somewhat apposite that you've extended my handling of questions by bringing in another member of the Smith Commission who regularly bemoans the fact that I react in an uncharitable fashion to his participation in the Smith Commission, but on his last day in Parliament I will desist from such behaviour. Mr Gray raises issues from the Audit Scotland report, which, as I told the Education Committee this morning, I think is a reasonable and fair report. It recounts the fact that progress has been made in closing the poverty-related attainment gap, but it also recognises that these challenges are stubborn. The report also highlights that progress around the country is differential by local authority area. And I think there's a substantial issue that needs to be explored there, which I will discuss with local authority partners, should the government be returned at the election, to ensure that the lessons of good performance and good improvement that are being achieved in some parts of the country can be reflected in other parts of the country. And that will enable the government to intensify the work that we've said would always take us, would always be a longer-term project than one individual parliamentary term. But I think the key conclusion of the Audit Scotland report is that good progress has been made, and the government will build on that if it is re-elected in May.
Question number 8, Jamie Green.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on its roadmap for higher education students to return to university.
Richard Lockhead.
Universities will continue to adhere to the limit of 5% of students for in-person learning at any one time until 26th of April. There will be some limited flexibility above this 5% limit for some specialised and postgraduate courses. Arrangements for any increase in the number of students beyond the 5% limit after the 26th of April will be discussed with universities when, of course, Scotland will move into protection levels. I am pleased to announce today a package of further support for further and higher education students to provide reassurance that they can complete their studies where these have been impacted by COVID-19 restrictions. That package includes full-time HE students being eligible to receive a guaranteed one-off COVID payment of up to a maximum of £1,600 for additional study of 16 weeks or less, and HE students who require extension beyond 16 weeks can apply to SAS and continue to receive the standard monthly package of bursary, grant, loan and fees until their extended course date ends.
Jamie Green.
Can I thank the Minister for that update? But there remains concern that for the majority of higher education students, a meaningful full return to campus is not currently proposed until May, and even then it's only for blended learning. Under the Government's current roadmap proposals, students will be able to go to the pub, but not to lecture theatres. So can I ask, if the virus situation allows for it, are there any plans to alter the course of action and allow more students to get back onto campus as quickly as possible?
Richard Lockhead.
We are taking a cautious approach in Scotland, and our objective absolutely is to allow more students to return to campus when it's safe to do so. And we're paying close attention to the course of the pandemic and the advice from clinicians and others. And as I outlined in my initial answer, we're keeping this under very close review. And after the 26th of April, we'll take a decision as Scotland hopefully will move into protection levels as to what that means for further and higher education. So please rest assured we are absolutely determined to ensure that as many students can complete their courses and get a degree of university experience, if it's safe to do so, before the end of this term, and we hope to make that progress.
That concludes portfolio questions in education and skills, and now we'll move on to the health and sport portfolio. And I have question number 1 from Monica Lennon.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what financial commitment it has made to support the delivery of the refreshed heart disease improvement plan.
Marie Goujon.
Heart Disease Action Plan on the 23rd of March, so just yesterday, and confirmed an initial investment of £2.2 million to drive forward the actions in the plan. And that represents a doubling of investment from the previous Heart Disease Improvement Plan. Now, delivery of the actions contained within that plan will enable us to minimise preventable heart disease and to ensure that everyone with suspected heart disease in Scotland has timely and equitable access to diagnosis, to treatment and care that supports them in living well with their condition.
Monica Lennon.
I thank the Minister for her response. With 700,000 people in Scotland living with heart disease, the publication of the action plan is welcome. And we know that adequate funding is vital. in order to meet the needs of people across Scotland to have the best possible treatment and care. I welcome what the Minister has said about the increase in funding, but in the last iteration of the plan, the funding was only £1 million, and that's compared to £117 million for cancer and £42 million for type 2 diabetes. What is the Minister's response to those campaigners and patients who don't yet feel convinced that heart disease is a strong enough priority for the Government?
Marie Goujon.
I would assure everyone that tackling heart disease is a strong priority for this Government, and I would say that what we've proposed is the initial investment, and as I've just said in my previous response, that represents a doubling of resource to what was provided previously. But I would also say that the delivery of the key actions within the Heart Disease Action Plan, such as the effective use of data that we've outlined in priority 4 of that will all enable us to ensure that the appropriate future allocation of resource is done in a way that will drive forward improved patient outcomes. So I hope that provides some assurance to the member.
Supplementary from Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In 2019, I raised the fact that while heart disease kills 3 times as many women as breast cancer in Scotland, evidence revealed by the British Heart Foundation showed that the prognosis for female patients remains much poorer than for men. Can the Minister advise what steps have been taken over the last 2 years to involve medical professionals in improving this unacceptable situation?
Marie Goujon.
I think in relation to the member's question that we absolutely recognise the significant impact of heart disease on women in Scotland, and that's why in our programme for government we made a commitment to the development and implementation of a women's health plan, and we included cardiac disease as a key pillar of that plan. So the aim of the plan will be to reduce women's health inequalities by raising awareness around women's health and improving access to healthcare for women throughout their life, and implementation of the actions within the women's health plan will align with the implementation of the Heart Disease Action Plan, which highlights the importance of tackling inequities in access to diagnosis, to treatment and care for people with heart disease.
Question number 2, Clare Baker.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on what action it is planning to address the backlog in cervical screening appointments that has arisen because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and whether this will include offering HPV self-testing.
Marie Goujon.
The Scottish Government has provided just under £1 million in support to support capacity in sample taking and colposcopy. And the impacts of COVID-19, including the need for additional infection control measures, continue to present challenges, but these are being kept under close review. There aren't any plans at the moment to issue self-testing kits as part of the programme's recovery. And that's because while it continues to gather evidence, the UK National Screening Committee hasn't yet recommended that self-sampling should be incorporated into the national programme as yet. But a pilot study is underway in NHS Dumfries and Galloway, and a more extensive pilot is currently being scoped.
Clare Baker.
Thank you. As the Minister will know, there is a reported backlog of 6 months within the screening programme, and Joe's Cervical Cancer Trust has called for a rollout of the self-testing. Screening rates are lowest among young women and in the most deprived areas. So I would urge the Government to push forward with a wider rollout of self-testing, at least for these groups. And I do recognise the pilot that's taking place in Dumfries and Galloway and welcome that there's scoping for further pilots. But I would hope that given the circumstances we're living under, and we're still in a lockdown situation, that we could see faster progress in using the self-testing kits to extend the number of women who take part in the programme.
Marie Goujon.
I can completely understand why the member and why other members would ask for faster progress on this, but I do think it is obviously vitally important that we take the best clinical available advice and base our decisions on that. And that's where we do base the advice on the UK National Screening Committee, who haven't yet advised us to do that. But that's where I think the pilot that we have got underway is really important. And as I said in my first answer, we will be scoping out a further research project, and I think that could be a really important piece of work, but I think it's really important that we make sure that research takes place, that we can learn any potential lessons from it, and then take the further clinical advice to see whether that's something we should roll out or where we go next.
Question number 3, Maurice Corrie.
To ask the Scottish Government what action it is taking to ensure wider accessibility to organised sport for children and young persons and people once restrictions on this are lifted.
Marie Goujon.
Physical activity and sport have an absolutely crucial role to play in Scotland's recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. And in the schools environment, the Active Schools programme will remain a central pillar in getting young people to participate in sport. And it will be vital that we work with and listen to young people to really rebuild that enthusiasm for sport too. Now, the programme for government commits Scottish Government to working with Sport Scotland and the Scottish governing bodies of sport to rebuild membership and participation levels following the negative impacts of COVID-19, as well as to build on the positive sport and physical activity behaviour changes that we've also seen during the pandemic, such as increased walking and cycling, and build wider community participation, particularly within disadvantaged and underrepresented communities.
Maurice Corrie.
I thank the Minister for her answer. There is understandable concern that COVID-19 has exacerbated inequality of access to sport for children from disadvantaged communities, at the same time worsening the impact on mental health and well-being. Can the Minister offer details on how the Scottish Government is actively assisting local authorities, ensuring that every child is able to participate in organised sports, such as swimming lessons, especially given the role sport can play in bridging the inequality gap for those living in poverty?
Marie Goujon.
The member is absolutely right, and that's why we see this as a key focus as we transition out of the pandemic, because physical activity is so hugely important in improving people's physical and mental health. And that's where I talked about the work that we're doing with Active Schools and that network. That's going to be really important as we move forward. And there's also, we've had sports facilities funding, which has been announced today by Sport Scotland, which is £900,000 worth of investment for clubs, for communities, for leisure trusts, and really to do exactly what the member's asking for that more diverse, to provide more diverse and inclusive opportunities for people, and about improving access to sport and physical activity for communities. And the First Minister outlined today a summer programme of activities as well, of which I hope that sport and physical activity will play a key role too. So I hope with all these activities, broadening access, we're able to address some of the issues that the member raises.
Question number 4, Annie Wells.
To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to research by Edinburgh University suggesting that more than half of severe COVID-19 cases were as a result of transmission in hospital during the second wave of the pandemic.
Jane Freeman.
The research study makes an important contribution to our consideration of all of these matters. However, it is limited in that it uses a wider nosocomial definition than has been agreed internationally, and that extended time frame overestimates nosocomial COVID-19 from the indeterminate category. That does make it reduce the opportunity we have to identify areas for improvement. However, this is an important piece of work, and it adds to the overall knowledge that we have about nosocomial infection and the additional steps that we need to take on top of those already taken in order to try and reduce this as far as possible.
Annie Wells.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. But as we remobilise the NHS from the grips of this pandemic, can the Cabinet Secretary just explain how the Government will prevent this from happening again?
Jane Freeman.
So in answering this, I need to just add a touch of realism here in terms of happening again. As one of the report authors notes, it is and I'm quoting, "The reality is there are a number of constraints on the ability to have complete infection protection in hospital settings. The reasons for that are multifactorial and complex, one being the built environment, where some of our older hospitals do not have single rooms, for example. And it is we need to be careful in comparing wave 1 and wave 2, given that in wave 2 we were dealing with a virus that is significantly more infectious than the virus strain that we were dealing with in wave 1. All of that said, though, there are a number of additional steps in place on top of the world-renowned Scottish Patient Safety Programme. So there is additional PPE, of course. There is now testing of all admissions to a hospital setting, from emergency right through to planned and including maternity. There's testing of our patient-facing and now extended to other NHS as well as social care staff. And there is, of course, the constant monitoring that our our clinical advisors do, led by our Chief Nursing Officer and the Nosocomio group that brings in additional academic and clinical experts to identify whether, looking internationally and elsewhere in the UK, whether there is more that we can do in addition to the steps I've already outlined.
Supplementary from Jackie Bailey.
Hospital transmission of COVID-19 remains an issue, with data for the week of the 28th of February showing at least a further 30 cases. Staff have been raising their concerns for several months now, and the Scottish Government does need to safeguard staff. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary what has been done to ensure that enhanced PPE is provided? And, Presiding Officer, could I take this opportunity to wish the Cabinet Secretary well in her retirement and thank her for her cooperation over the years?
Jean Freeman.
Thanks very much, and my thanks to Ms Bailey for those kind words. She is right. Nosocomial infection of any virus in a hospital setting, and indeed in other institutional settings, is really important. We have listened carefully to what staff have said to us about PPE. Our clinical advisors continue to look at this and see if there is more that can be done in terms of the PPE that staff are clinically advised to use. But of course, what we have also stressed most recently in communication with staff is the importance of individual staff members undertaking their own assessment of the risk that they believe that they face and exercising their professional judgment. Guidance is really important. Provision of PPE is really important, and I need to here record my thanks to our National Services procurement exercise that ensured that we never ran out of PPE at any point in this pandemic. But what is additionally important is that you leave room around that guidance for the professionals to be able to make their own judgment and management to then enable that clinical judgment. And where there are instances where there are difficulties around that, I'm very happy to intervene and ensure that the professional judgment takes first place.
Question number 5, Emma Harper.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on the short review into cancer pathway arrangements and reimbursement of travel expenses for patients in Dumfries and Galloway when it committed to carrying out a review on 24th of November 2020.
Jean Freeman.
I'm grateful to Ms Harper for her question. As I've previously explained, the pressures of the pandemic means that NHS Dumfries and Galloway and the board's partners have paused reviewing cancer pathways, which is a complex piece of work, and will return to that issue in the spring. So shortly, as we see case numbers come down, then the pressure on Dumfries and Galloway lessens. I've set out previously in the Chamber that the patient travel guidance will be comprehensively reviewed and will take full account of matters raised by Ms Harper. The review is a substantial exercise for Government and NHS boards, which requires prioritisation alongside our response not only to the pandemic but to the remobilisation of NHS services. And further updates will be provided as that review progresses.
Emma Harper.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response, and I thank her for everything she has done in this Parliament and wish her all the very best for the future. My constituent, Dr Gordon Baird, on behalf of Galloway Community Hospital Action Group, has lodged a petition which urges the Scottish Government to explore the creation of an agency or a commissioner to address the health needs of people in rural Scotland. Australia have already done this, and I'm due to meet Australia's Rural Health Minister to hear whether something like this could be established or addressed to help support people across Stranraer and Wigtonshire. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary whether, in principle, the Scottish Government would be open to looking at the creation of a Rural Health Commissioner?
Jean Freeman.
I'm grateful to Ms Harper for that question. I'm very happy to go beyond principle and let her know she will be very familiar, I know, with Sir Lewis Ritchie, who has undertaken considerable and very valuable work for us in looking at remote and rural medicine, instituting a number of improvements and, importantly, listening to practitioners in those areas. I'm very happy to let her and the Chamber know that work is underway to establish a National Institute for Remote and Rural Medicine and Healthcare Practice. And should this government be returned following the election, we will take every step to ensure that it is put in place as soon as possible.
Supplementary from Elaine Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. On the issue of reimbursement of patients' travel expenses, will the Scottish Government consider providing a review on reimbursement for chronic pain patients who have been forced to travel to England for pain relief and to pay privately because Scottish NHS pain clinics were closed during earlier lockdowns, and of course some patients are still having to go to England as waiting times have doubled? And can I also wish the Cabinet Secretary all the best for the future?
Jean Freeman.
Thanks very much, and can I thank Ms Smith for her question. She has been a doughty champion of this and many other issues during her time in this Parliament, and extend my best wishes back to her. She raises a really important point. As she will know, the current Act and the legal advice on that Act prevents us from using public funds to reimburse where that out-of-area treatment has not been followed through on the basis of an NHS Scotland referral. However, as she will know, I hope, today we announced our intention, should this government be returned, to bring forward legislation to ensure that mesh-injured women who have sought private treatment out of area can be reimbursed, and I would hope that my successor will consider what other areas may be appropriate in that regard.
Question number 6, James Kelly.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what action has been taken to reduce hospital waiting times.
Jean Freeman.
We're currently working with all health boards across Scotland with specific targeted action to reduce hospital waiting times. That includes the investment of additional resources, £60 million to be used directly to support specifically elective care, progressed within the context of the clinical prioritisation framework that I published in November. Additional investment to increase diagnostic capacity with 3 new scanners, CT scanners, ensuring access across all regions. Our first ever in Scotland early cancer diagnostic centres, 3 to be due to come on stream by the summer of this year. And of course, as Mr Kelly knows, the continued expansion through our elective centres with NHS Golden Jubilees Phase 1 expansion supporting eye care and orthopaedics now open and treating patients. The additional point, though, that I would make is that we need to recognise, as we remobilise our NHS, we need to take account of the fact that our NHS staff, very many of them, have worked tirelessly for over 15 months. They are still working in those pressured conditions. That has taken a physical and an emotional toll on them. And as we plan the recovery of our health service, we need to understand that they are our greatest single resource, and we need to allow time for them to recover so that they can continue to do the really important work that we need them to do and that we ask them to do.
James Kelly.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for her answer and wish her well. And I draw the Cabinet Secretary's attention to an article by Chloe Smith in this morning's Times. Ms Smith is a consultant orthopaedic surgeon and highlights the unprecedented levels of long waiting times for surgical operations. Even a 20% increase would mean that it would take 4 years to clear the backlog. This is a really serious situation. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary what action has been taken to reduce these waiting times so that people waiting on knee replacements don't have to wait 4 years to get some relief from their pain?
Jean Freeman.
So Mr Kelly is quite right. This is a really serious issue, and it has inevitably been created or exacerbated considerably by the past 15 months when the NHS pivoted largely, certainly in the first wave, paused all but urgent and emergency treatment and some cancer treatment in order to deal with COVID. In the second wave period, we have begun to remobilise. We did some useful work, our NHS staff did useful work over the summer period to begin to catch up, but then the second wave hit and that was inevitably reduced. There is very specific work underway to look particularly at elective wait times as well as additional work on cancer, as Ms Johann highlighted earlier. When this session of portfolio questions finish, I am going straight into a meeting with the current Chief Operating Officer of the NHS, John Conahan, to look in detail at additional actions to those that I've set out, and I would hope that we would be able, should this government return after the election, which I very much hope it does, be able to set out a comprehensive remobilisation plan. Officials are well underway in that work. All our boards have produced their own immediate plans. We're bringing those together to look at how we progress in order that people do not wait as long as Mr Kelly suggests that they do, because that would not be acceptable, whilst at the same time we make sure that our NHS staff, who have worked so very hard indeed and for whom we owe significant thanks, are given time to take the annual leave that they've postponed, to have the rest and the recuperation that they need in order to carry forward the work that we want to undertake. Presiding Officer, I don't know if you would allow me a moment's flexibility to say a few things, since I think, unless there's another supplementary, this will be the last that I will say in this chamber. I just want to make a couple of points, and there's a number of people I would like to thank. I have been very privileged to be here. I've been especially privileged to hold 2 ministerial offices. And if my voice is now shaking, it's because you're all unusually being very nice to me, and I am very grateful to you for that. I've learned a great deal, certainly in social security, in establishing that service, but undoubtedly in the health service. And I have been honoured to be the Health Secretary, to play my part in working with our health service. The people I particularly want to thank, of course, are my constituents in Carrick, Cumnock and Doon Valley, undoubtedly the most beautiful and talented constituency in the whole of Scotland, and I hope that Elena Whitman will follow me to represent that constituency. But my thanks to them for electing me in the first place, to my constituency team, without whom none of this would be possible, to our civil servants and advisers, sometimes perhaps unintentionally, but certainly indirectly maligned. They do a fantastic job, and our clinical advisor team, I think, are second to none. And then finally, to a group of people who are rarely mentioned, but without whom Cabinet Secretaries and Ministers would flounder, and that is our private offices. I have been fortunate in 2 quite remarkable private offices to whom I owe a great deal of thanks. And lastly, Presiding Officer, my very best wishes to you in your retirement after many, many years of outstanding service to this Parliament and to the people of Scotland. Thank you.
Oh, well, I'm going to indulge myself now. Question number 7, Tom Arthur.
To ask the Scottish Government how it is supporting mental health services in the Renfrewshire South constituency.
Clare Hockey, who's having trouble with her camera, so we'll just hear from Clare, I hope. Perhaps. Perhaps that might not have been your last word, Cabinet Secretary. We'll just give it a moment. Oh, we've lost Clare Hockey. It's a very specific question. Cabinet Secretary, would you be able to perhaps address a little bit for Mr Arthur if he asks his question again? Tom Arthur.
To ask the Cabinet Secretary what support the Scottish Government is providing for mental health services in the Renfrewshire South constituency.
It's a very specific question, and I will make sure that Mr Arthur gets the detail of the answer that Ms Hockey would undoubtedly have been able to give. I can say a couple of things I think are really important. First of all, the mental health transition plan that Ms Hockey has overseen provides significant additional resource to mental health recovery, focusing not only on CAMHS waiting times, but on preventative and wellbeing mental health for the wider population. And secondly, that I am pleased pleased to say that a significant number of the community wellbeing centres that we announced in a previous programme for government are already ready to be operational from the 1st of April, and others will come on stream very shortly after. Those provide wider support services, particularly for children and young people and their families, focusing certainly on mental health, but having a very preventative and supportive focus, all of which I think will be of considerable benefit. And as I said, I'm very happy to ensure that Ms Hockey provides detailed answer to Mr Arthur before today is out.
Mr Arthur has waived his right to supplementary. Thank you very much, Mr Arthur. And I call question number 8, Bill Kidd.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what action it is taking to encourage women and girls to participate in organised sport.
Marie Gouchon.
The Scottish Government appreciates the importance of sport and physical activity for women and girls in Scotland and the positive impact that it has on their physical and mental health. And as we look to rebuild sport in Scotland, we'll have to all support women and girls to safely return to sport. Now, the Scottish Government is committed to working with Sport Scotland and the Scottish governing bodies of sport to rebuild membership and participation levels following the negative impacts of the pandemic, and to enable women and girls to undertake supported group exercise outdoors. We recently announced that from the 12th of March, group organised outdoor non-contact sport and physical activity could resume, and similarly, organised outdoor contact sport for boys and girls under 12 can resume from the same date, subject to sport-specific guidance.
Bill Kidd.
I thank the Minister for her answer and welcome the action that the Scottish Government is taking to break down the barriers that many women and girls face in accessing organised sport, and believe it's important that women and girls are well represented in the sporting community of Scotland. Can I also ask the Minister what action the Scottish Government is taking at a local level, particularly in schools, to encourage young girls to participate in sports at a younger age, as we know that teenage girls in particular are increasingly likely to drop off from participating in organised sport?
Marie Gouchon.
Particularly in the schools environment, the Active Schools programme will remain a central pillar in getting young people participating in sport, and we have over 400 active school staff across the 32 local authorities. Prior to the pandemic, in a single year, over 300,000 young people made a combined 7.3 million visits to active school sport and physical activity sessions before school, at lunchtime and after school, and that was supported by 21,000 volunteers. And to get back to and surpass these levels, it's going to be vital that we work with and listen to young people to rebuild that enthusiasm for sport. And through the Young Ambassador programme, there are 150 registered secondary schools. So Sport Scotland will target these schools to support those young ambassadors to promote participation in sport in their schools too. But I also think it's really important that we raise the profile of women in sport. I think we have some fantastic role models, and I think it's really important to highlight that. We also seem to do particularly well when it comes to sports like football and netball too. So I think we all have a role in talking about these really important sports and where women really do excel, and making the most of these really positive role models that we have.
That concludes portfolio questions and health and sport. We'll now move on to communities and local government. Questions 6 and 8 have been grouped together, but that is now the only grouping in this portfolio. So those who wish to ask a supplementary, please press the request to speak button or put an R in the chat function during that question. Question number 1, Christine Graham.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what progress has been made on increasing levels of community engagement since the enactment of the Community Empowerment Scotland Act 2015.
Aileen Campbell.
Thank you. Since introducing the Community Empowerment Act in 2015, we have taken many positive steps to increase community engagement. We introduced participation requests and asset transfers, which provide a powerful mechanism for communities to participate in public decision-making and take control of public land and buildings. Investing in Communities Fund, launched in 2019-20, backed with around £11.5 million each year over 3 years, enables communities to decide on their own terms how to address local challenges. Our National Support Programme for Participatory Budgeting has enabled over 122,000 voters to have a direct say on the allocation of millions of pounds. And we're working in partnership with COSLA through the Local Governance Review to help further empower communities and strengthen local democracy.
Christine Graham.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for her response, and as this is her final appearance in the Chamber, I wish her well. The COVID pandemic has brought communities together as never before. Broughton Community Shop, Tweed Togs, the Bridge Galashiels, Tweed Dale Youth Action, Pennycook Ambassadors, Gorebridge Resilience and many more, but I don't want to try your patience, Presiding Officer. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree that this really is community empowerment and something upon which the legislation allows communities to build?
Aileen Campbell.
I absolutely would agree with all that Christine Graham has said. Thank her for her kind words as well. I am very familiar with some of the groups that she's outlined, particularly the Broughton Shop, which is just over the hill from me in Biggar, and they've done a phenomenal amount of work. If it hadn't been for our communities, the country simply wouldn't have been able to demonstrate the resilience that it has over the last year. We need to take that learning, make sure we don't lose that, because if we trust our communities and support our communities, then Scotland will succeed and will meet all of our aspirations on our national performance framework. So I pay tribute to all of the work that Christine Graham's constituents have done over this last year and say a sincere thanks to them, because without them we wouldn't be where we are. Thank you.
Question number 2, Lewis MacDonald.
To ask the Scottish Government what support it will provide for the regeneration of the city centre and beachfront in Aberdeen.
Aileen Campbell.
The Scottish Government is committed to working with Aberdeen City Council and other partners as they take forward the City and Beachfront Master Plan. The Government has demonstrated its commitment to Aberdeen and its city region through a variety of strategic investments. This includes a £125 million commitment to the Aberdeen City Region deal, the £62 million committed to the Energy Transition Fund, and significant ongoing capital funding for community-led regeneration. The Government's new £325 million place-based investment programme will also provide further funding to Aberdeen over the next 5 years. The programme will help to link and align place-based investments, ensuring a coherent approach to regeneration with involvement and support of communities.
Lewis MacDonald.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer, and I too wish her well after her term as a member of this Parliament and a Minister. The Cabinet Secretary will have heard at First Minister's questions about the devastating news for Aberdeen City Centre and regeneration of the proposal to close the John Lewis store on George Street with the loss of 265 jobs. She may also have heard since then that a petition has been launched calling for John Lewis to reconsider that decision, and Aberdeen Economic Partnership has offered to engage with the John Lewis Partnership to discuss ways in which that decision can be reconsidered. Would the Scottish Government support that offer from the Aberdeen Economic Partnership, and will she work with all concerned to seek to persuade John Lewis to reverse this decision?
Aileen Campbell.
Thank you, and thank the member for his question. Like the First Minister, we share the disappointment to hear of John Lewis's plans, and appreciate that this will be an incredibly concerning time for the staff involved and their families. The First Minister also intimated that there would be support there through the PACE initiative. However, if the further developments continue, then I think it would be wise for Government to continue to work and to explore all options, to see what can be done and what actions and activity and support might be helpful in this space. I would also point out that we have, in this more general sense, have recognised that our high streets will be critical for our recovery. And today we, along with COSLA, have published our response to the Town Centre Action Plan review, which I would commend to the member. It was led by Professor Lee Sparks, again someone who is esteemed within this field, and I pay tribute to Lee for his work in this area. So absolutely we'll work through and make sure that we work across government, work through any options and opportunities that there may be there, and commit to engage with the member as best we can. I would just also put in record my thanks to him for all his contribution and being for a strong voice for Aberdeen and the North East for many years, and wish him well in the next chapter of his life. Thank you.
Question number 3, Liam MacArthur.
To ask the Scottish Government when it last met Orkney Islands Council and what was discussed.
Aileen Campbell.
Last met with James Stockin, leader, and John Mundell, interim chief executive of Orkney Islands Council, on Tuesday the 23rd of March to discuss a range of issues relating to the relaxation of COVID restrictions specific to Orkney and the islands.
Liam MacArthur.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response, and join with others in wishing her all the best. I think I did that already in the debate yesterday. The Cabinet Secretary will be aware of the disparity in funding per head of population between Scotland's 3 island authorities. At present, this represents a shortfall in Orkney's allocation of around £8 million compared to Shetland and £15 million in comparison to the Western Isles. This has been a long-standing concern of Orkney Islands Council, but little progress has been made over recent years. So does the Cabinet Secretary agree that this disparity needs to be addressed in the next session of the Scottish Parliament?
Aileen Campbell.
I thank Liam MacArthur for his question and for his kind words again. The way in which funding goes to local authorities, as he knows, will be through the distribution formula, which is agreed with COSLA. Any changes to that would need to come via COSLA, and of course, whoever is in this place that I have at the moment in the next session can continue to engage with COSLA on that basis. I also would just point, though, that there has been the recent investment through the Islands deal, which my colleague Michael Matheson has taken forward. So there continues to be a real recognition of the importance of our island communities in the success of Scotland. So we'll take on his viewpoint. I'll make sure that my predecessor, or whoever comes into this place next, understands his concern, but it would be for engagement with COSLA to take forward any changes to the distribution formula.
Question number 4, Annabel Ewing.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on its housing strategy.
Aileen Campbell.
Okay, thank you. On the 15th of March, we published Scotland's first long-term housing strategy, Housing to 2040, a 20-year plan to deliver good quality, energy-efficient, zero-emissions homes with access to good outdoor space, transport links, digital connectivity and community services. It includes new commitments to deliver 100,000 affordable homes by 2032, set a single set of standards for our homes, tackle high rents in the private sector and decarbonise heating in line with our climate ambitions. And as we've said many times before, however, housing is about so much more than bricks and mortar. And this strategy will also contribute to our aims of tackling poverty and inequality and driving inclusive economic growth. To realise the ambition in this strategy, it will require a lot of hard work, but in the pursuit of a fairer, greener Scotland, that work will be more than worth it.
Annabel Ewing.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer, and I very much welcome the SNP Scottish Government's ambitious house building plans for the next decade. As the MSP for Cowdenbeath constituency, can the Cabinet Secretary provide any clarity at this stage as to what is planned in particular for the Kingdom of Fife in terms of the number of houses to be built, the jobs to be created and the investment to be made?
Aileen Campbell.
Thank you. Scotland has led the way in the delivery of affordable housing across the UK, with almost 100,000 affordable homes delivered since 2007, driven by my colleague Kevin Stewart, who has been a great colleague to work alongside, and I pay tribute to him for his commitment on this. Housing to 2040 includes an ambition to deliver a further 100,000 affordable homes up to 2032, with at least 70% of them for social rent, once the current 50,000 affordable homes target has been delivered. And this ambition will play a role in helping Scotland's economy to recover from the pandemic, including supporting a total investment package of around £16 billion and 12,000 to 14,000 jobs each year. But it's not just about the good homes, it's also about creating great places, and I know how committed Annabel Ewing is to making sure that her constituents are supported and her colleagues in Fife Council. Therefore, we have made over £150 million available for affordable housing in Fife over this Parliament, and this will deliver a range of housing in a mix of affordable tenures, but primarily focusing on social rented housing, which is a key government priority. But I do commend Fife Council for many of their ambitious projects across the Kingdom of Fife to ensure that people across Fife get access to good housing, and will continue to keep her updated about what that means specifically for Cowdenbeath.
Question number 5, Maureen Watt.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how it plans to take forward the recommendations by the Tenement Maintenance Working Group in its strategy Housing to 2040.
Kevin Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Our new long-term housing strategy, Housing to 2040, sets out our intention to introduce a new housing standard so that everyone can expect the same high standards of housing and accessibility, no matter what kind of home or tenure they live in. The new standard will support our commitment to address common standards in tenements and take action on the recommendations of the Parliamentary Working Group on Tenement Maintenance. And I'd like to take this opportunity in the last day of term to thank the members of that group and in particular my colleague Ben McPherson, who helped found it.
Maureen Watt.
I thank the Minister for that answer. If in post after the election, will the Minister be bold in following the recommendations such as compulsory owners associations and building reserve funds so that our wonderful tenement buildings, such as all the granite ones in Tory and in my constituency and across Aberdeen, will be restored to their former glory?
Kevin Stewart.
We intend to undertake research this year that will consider the need for building reserve funds for tenement dwellings and mandatory owners associations for tenements as recommended by the Parliamentary Working Group. And the outcome of the research will allow us to make a determination on what the levels of building reserve funds should be set at and the cost for mandatory owners associations. So we will take action for the benefit of Maureen Watt's constituents in Tory and in other places. Can I pay tribute to my friend and colleague Maureen Watt, who has been amazing for her constituents in this Parliament. Maureen and I go back a long way, 30 years. She's been the best possible friend, and the only time that she's ever really feared me is when I thought she was going to go into labour in a car that her and I were in a snowy country road.
Too much information, Mr. Stewart. Right, we'll move on quickly. Question number 6, Ruth Maguire.
To ask the Scottish Government what action it will take to increase the number of affordable homes.
And how well do you know Miss Maguire, Mr. Stewart?
Not that well, Presiding Officer. As the Cabinet Secretary has mentioned, having already delivered almost 100,000 affordable homes since 2007, we want to deliver another 100,000 homes by 2032, with 70% of those being for social rent. As our 20-year housing strategy, Housing to 2040, sets out, this ambitious target will begin when the current 50,000 affordable homes target has been delivered, and work to continue to do all of that safely is ongoing. To start on this path, we're investing an initial £3.44 billion. Delivering these homes, of course, will be beneficial to Scotland's communities, and it will also provide a significant economic boost, supporting a total investment package of around £16 billion and up to 14,000 jobs a year.
Ruth Maguire.
Officer, I thank the Minister for that answer. Within the strategy, can I particularly welcome that the new housing standard applies to all tenures so that everyone is living in good quality accommodation, regardless of whether they own it or rent it from a private or social landlord. I've had a number of constituency cases where the local authority have delayed the repairs to damp properties, including to the homes of folk vulnerable due to their age or medical conditions, citing the pandemic restrictions as the reason. After making representations to them, these have been resolved. However, I wonder if the Minister could confirm that such repairs are deemed essential and that all landlords have a responsibility to maintain their stock and nobody should be expected to stay in a damp property.
Kevin Stewart.
Presiding Officer, I appreciate that dampness in folks' homes can be extremely distressing. Any house let by a social landlord must be substantially free from rising and penetrating damp. And if problems come to light, any repairs must be carried out as soon as is reasonably possible. Repairs of this nature can be carried out under the coronavirus restrictions, where the work is essential, can be done safely, and where owners or tenants' permission is granted. The current regulations set out the essential works for minimum standards of habitability, safety and maintenance, for example, to prevent significant problems developing they should be carried out in people's homes at this time. And of course, it's up to landlords in consultation with tenants to carry out a risk assessment to ensure that that work can be carried out safely.
Question number 8, Gillian Martin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how many affordable homes it has delivered since 2007.
Kevin Stewart.
Presiding Officer, Scotland has led the way in the delivery of affordable housing, with almost 100,000 affordable homes delivered since 2007, including over 68,000 for social rent, over 15,000 of which were council homes. We want everyone in Scotland to live in a warm home that is affordable and meets their needs, and that is why housing, and affordable housing in particular, has been and remains a priority for this government. As a member knows, we're on track to deliver 50,000. We were on track to deliver 50,000 homes within this Parliament, and we remain committed to completing that. Unfortunately, coronavirus got in the way of the job. We're working with partners across the housing sector to deliver the remaining homes as quickly and as safely as possible.
Gillian Martin.
Thank the Minister for that answer. Housing provision in rural areas is critical in ensuring we stem rural depopulation and support communities to thrive, as the Minister knows. Can the Minister explain how the Scottish Government's housing strategy will specifically support rural communities like mine in Aberdeenshire East?
Kevin Stewart.
Presiding Officer, we make clear in Housing to 2040 our commitment to take action so that rural and island communities have access to high quality, affordable and market housing, which has been planned alongside the economic and physical infrastructure that's required to help people live, work and thrive in these areas, as well as work to help stem rural depopulation. We have committed to continuing the £30 million rural and islands housing funds, which support additional affordable rural and island homes as part of the wider affordable housing programme. And in addition to that, we have announced new permitted development rights to allow for the conversion of agricultural buildings for residential and commercial uses. Presiding Officer, this might be the last opportunity for me to speak. Can I wish you a very happy retirement, and can I wish all of the best to the Cabinet Secretary and her future endeavours, two cracking South Lanarkshire quines who I'll miss greatly.
Thank you very, very much, Mr Stewart. Now call question number 7, Alistair Allen.
To ask the Scottish Government how much it has spent supporting communities affected by COVID-19 in the last year.
Aileen Campbell.
We have allocated more than £1 billion to support local communities through the coronavirus pandemic. This includes over £550 million through the Communities Funding Package, including more than £140 million to tackle food insecurity, £51 million to tackle and to continue the provision of free school meals during the school closures and holiday periods, and over £100 million for the third sector and community organisations. Our 2021-22 Scottish budget includes an additional £100 million to support households through pandemic support payments, meaning low-income families could receive up to £530 additional financial support between last December and the end of the year.
Alistair Allen.
I thank the Minister for that response. The Scottish Government dashboard indeed shows that 6.9 million of the funding that she's mentioned in those areas has been spent in my own local authority area. Can I ask, however, what the Government will do to ensure that funding in this area develops in line with hopefully the positive developments we see as we come out of the final phases of the COVID pandemic in the months ahead?
Aileen Campbell.
I thank the member for his question. We'll always seek to ensure that we can learn all we can from the support that we've put in place to make sure that we can continue to support people during this pandemic, and that our focus will be relentless on ensuring that that is the case, and that's what drives our recovery approach. COVID has exposed the inequalities of our society, and therefore recovery should not be about returning back to normal when normality has failed too many. Instead, we should renew and reform our country to create a fairer, equal Scotland. And guided by the work of the Social Renewal Advisory Board and their calls to action, my colleague Shirley-Ann Somerville and I have published our initial responses to that work, along with £25 million to take forward some of the recommended actions. So ensuring people in place are at the heart of recovery will be the job of the next government and the next Parliament. I expect and I know that Alistair Allen will ensure that that continues to be the case. Presiding Officer, if I may as well, if that's my last opportunity to speak in the Chamber, I'd just like to say a few wee words which will be my final contribution to this Parliament, though I'm aware that I have had many final contributions of late, with Christine Graham last night saying I had more comebacks than Frank Sinatra. But these are my final words, and it's with an enormous lump in my throat that I say all this, as the reality of not seeking re-election to serve the constituents of Clydesdale starts to hit home. Clydesdale, of course, being the most beautiful constituency in Scotland. When I intimated that I would not seek re-election, I said that a big part of that was about wanting to spend a bit more time with my boys, Angus and Crawford, who are grown up fast. They've never known their mum not to be a minister, and when I had my youngest son, I became the first Scottish minister to take maternity leave. But stepping back from frontline politics does not mean stepping back from my aspirations for this country and for our communities. And just as the country relied upon its communities to help respond to the pandemic and help with our resilience, so too will our recovery be dependent upon them, their creativity, their commitment and their ingenuity. Flourishing, vibrant communities that are empowered and trusted will be central to how we reform and renew our country with fairness and equality at its heart. And it has been my privilege to serve as Communities and Local Government Minister and to get a glimpse into the glorious diversity of our communities and all the rich vibrancy they bring. And it's also been a privilege to serve in all of the portfolios that I've held. But without this descending into an Oscar-style tribute, I do just want to say a few thanks to my ministerial colleagues and the amazing group of SNP MSPs I've worked and campaigned alongside, all the staff in this Parliament, the posties, the canteen staff, the clerks and everyone who keeps this place ticking over. My office staff in Carluke, Charlie, Ewan and Jack, and my long-suffering private office and all the government officials and SPADs that provide so much support to ministers and have done so much during this challenging year. For now, I'm looking forward to new challenges ahead, including hitting the road with my colleagues to campaign for the restoration of powers to this Parliament. Now, I know we don't all share that objective, but can I say to all the MSPs across this chamber and across the parliamentary divide who I've worked with, chewed the fat with, had some laughs along the way, and to everyone, thank you for being great colleagues. All the best to you, Presiding Officer, as well. Look forward to catching up with you in South Lanarkshire sometime soon. But for me, that's all, folks. Thank you.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. And that was a lovely way to conclude portfolio questions, I have to say. And we'll now move on to the next item of business.
Right, back to normal. The next item of business is a statement by Fergus Ewing on administration of Greensill Capital UK for businesses in Scotland. The Cabinet Secretary will take questions at the end of his statement, so there should be no interventions or interruptions. And I call on Fergus Ewing. Cabinet Secretary, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. My statement concerns the administration of Greensill Capital UK Limited and its implications for businesses in Scotland. I would emphasise at the outset that the subject matter concerns sensitive commercial affairs. Therefore, I will be careful in my remarks and in answers to members' questions to avoid saying anything that might breach commercial confidences or cause harm. I hope too that members might also recognise the sensitivity of this situation and the reasons for my caution. Greensill Capital is a UK-headquartered financial services company specialising in supply chain finance, working capital solutions and securitisation. Greensill Capital also has operations in the United States, Germany, Australia, Singapore, China, South Africa and the Middle East. The last full audited accounts of Greensill Capital UK for the year to 31st December 2019 shows revenues of $428 million and total assets of $682 million. More recently, the business has faced financial difficulties, and on 8 March, joint administrators from Grant Thornton were appointed to Greensill Capital UK. While Greensill Capital has no base in Scotland, the reverberations of the administration may still be felt here. At this stage, reliable information on the extent of Greensill's operations, the range of companies it financed, and the financial exposure of creditors remains unclear. A more substantive picture should emerge over the coming weeks as the administrators assess Greensill's state of affairs and prepare a statement of proposals for creditors. In the meantime, certain wider commercial repercussions of the Greensill administration have begun to surface. For example, it's clear that the Gupta family group of companies, known as the GFG Alliance, has been impacted. The GFG Alliance is a large multinational with over 35,000 employees operating from some 270 sites in 30 countries across the world. In Scotland, GFG owns several businesses through Liberty Steel Group, Alvance Aluminium Group and Cymec Energy Group. These groups operate the DL and Clydebridge Steelworks, the Lochaber Aluminium Smelter, the hydroelectric power station at Fort William, Johann Highland Estates and Shand Cycles. Some of these businesses have received public sector support. Across other parts of the UK, the GFG Alliance is prominent in the steel, engineering and energy sectors. Liberty Steel UK, for example, is Britain's third largest steel producer and employs nearly 3,000 people at 11 sites across England, Scotland and Wales. I spoke with Sanjeev Gupta, Executive Chairman of the GFG Alliance, last Thursday. He was open about challenges posed by the collapse of Greensill, but also emphasised the underlying operational health of GFG's Scottish operations. He indicated that market demand is strong and metal prices are currently among the best seen in over a decade. Hence, GFG's Scottish steel and aluminium businesses are presently on a profitable footing, according to Mr Gupta. Mr Gupta told me the group has adequate funding for its current needs whilst they progress refinancing. He nevertheless confirmed that stabilising the finances of GFG Alliance in the near term is important to its future activities, including those in Scotland. On Monday, I spoke with the trade unions representing GFG workers in Scotland, GMB, Unite and Community. They expressed a very positive picture of the current strong markets in metals and the strategic value in retaining the skills and industrial capacity in these operations needed for the transition in Scotland to a low-carbon economy. Members of this Parliament, particularly those who have constituency interests, will want to be kept up to date, and rightly so. That's why I was keen to make this statement and take questions before the election recess. I will also undertake to update members further as required by circumstances throughout recess. But I can assure Parliament that officials are engaging regularly with the business at local and national level, and through a ministerial task force, we are monitoring the situation closely. Today, I want to provide more information about GFG's footprint in Scotland, the public sector support that has been provided, and the economic return. Liberty Steel DL Limited is the recipient of a Scottish Investment Bank loan of £7 million. DL recommenced steel production in late 2016, having been mothballed by its previous owner, and the loan facility was agreed in March 2017. According to information from the business, at the end of 2020-21 financial year, Liberty Steel DL will have invested over £18 million in order to make DL operational and enhance its capability and product portfolio. In the 5 years since reopening in 2016, DL will have produced and sold over 300,000 tonnes of heavy plate steel. Sales to domestic and international markets have generated over £163 million in revenue. And perhaps most importantly, DL currently employs 140 workers, including 3 apprentices, retaining vital industrial skills and supporting livelihoods. In autumn 2016, the Government intervened in support of continuing aluminium production in Loch Aber. The Fort William smelter is of huge significance as the UK's last remaining smelter, with a current capacity to produce 48,000 tonnes of aluminium per year. The complex has been operational for over 90 years and remains a major source of employment in the West Highlands. In 2016, Scottish ministers sought Parliament's permission through the Finance and Constitution Committee to provide a guarantee of the smelter's power purchases. The committee reviewed and approved the contingent liability. Our support, which we offered to any bidder with plans for long-term industrial operations of the Loch Aber businesses, prevented the break-up of the assets and closure of the smelter. The amounts guaranteed by the Scottish Government are published in the Scottish Government's consolidated accounts and vary between £14 and £32 million per annum over the 25-year life of the guarantee. Members may be interested in the economic return. According to information provided by the business, GFG has created 40 new jobs in Loch Aber since 2016, raising total employment in the complex to 200 jobs currently. Payroll and pension contributions generated from this employment total over £41 million, and spending with suppliers, including many local businesses, exceeds £34 million since GFG's acquisition. These income flows are the very lifeblood that sustains communities and supports a large and valuable supply chain with hundreds of associated jobs. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, can I remind members of the sensitive commercial nature of the issues arising from the administration of Greensill Capital UK? The collapse of Greensill has clearly caused difficulties for a range of businesses, and we must tread carefully to avoid fuelling harmful speculation. We in this government will continue to do everything in our power to support Scotland's steel and aluminium sectors and their highly skilled workers. Our actions will always be motivated by the desire to protect and create jobs, and to protect strategic industrial assets and foundational sectors on which additional supply chains and jobs rely. As ministers, we are accountable for the decisions we take, and I want to assure Parliament that where we have intervened, substantial due diligence was undertaken and appropriate measures put in place to protect and minimise the exposure of public funds. No industrial intervention is without risk, but I believe we have struck the right balance here. We have supported and enabled shorter and longer-term industrial and economic objectives. We are mitigating risks as far as we can. Critically, Presiding Officer, we kept Scotland's steel industry, kept our only aluminium sector open, and we are keeping people in skilled work.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. The Cabinet Secretary will now take questions on the issues raised in this statement. I'll allow around 20 minutes for questions, after which we should move on to the next item of business. It would be helpful if members who press the request to speak buttons now if they were to ask a question, or press R in the chat function if they're remote. I call first Mordred Fraser, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I welcome the statement that we've been calling for and thank the Cabinet Secretary for advance sight of it. There has been considerable media speculation about the future of the GFG Group, given the financial issues affecting Greensill Capital and what this means for the enterprises in Scotland and in the rest of the United Kingdom. It is encouraging to hear from the Cabinet Secretary that the GFG Group believe the underlying businesses are viable. I would like to ask him what assurances can he give us, therefore, about the future of the workforces at DL and Clyde Bridge and in Fort William. And while he says Mr Gupta believes the businesses are healthy, has the Scottish Government done anything themselves to get this independently verified, rather than just relying on his word that that is the case? Secondly, there are public monies at stake here. This government has a poor track record of investing public funds, if we look at BIFAB, Ferguson Marine and Prestwick Airport. It has been suggested that the total guarantee from the Scottish Government is close to £600 million. Is that figure correct? And how does the Scottish Government assess the overall risk to public funds today in the event of a financial collapse of the GFG group?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I thank Mr Fraser for his question, and I can assure you that the continued operation of both the smelter and the steelworks are foremost in our objectives. And I made that absolutely clear when I met with the trade union representatives on Monday, and we had an extremely useful discussion. In that discussion, they shared with me their view that the workforce in both plants are optimistic. They are confident about the future ability of the plants to operate successfully. We have, of course, been advised that the plant at aluminium, at Fort William, the smelter, has been trading profitably. Mr Fraser asks what independent analysis we do of that. We receive regular information which our officials share and discuss with our professional advisors, as Mr Fraser would rightly expect. I do think that Mr Fraser should be aware, because he was a member of the Finance and Constitution Committee that approved the guarantee, along with colleagues in his party and across other parties, as was right and proper, that he will agree that we did obtain to provide mitigation and protection against risk, appropriate securities, including a security over the plant, the smelter, the hydroelectric station, and I can confirm that these are very valuable assets, and the security value, although something that is commercially confidential, is very significant indeed. Presiding Officer, we took this action to avoid the loss of a steel industry and the loss of the only remaining aluminium smelter in Britain. If we hadn't acted, they would have closed.
Monica Lennon, followed by Willie Rennie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I also thank the Cabinet Secretary for advance sight of his statement and welcome the engagement with trade unions, and I remind the Chamber that I am a member of Unites and the GMB. The collapse of Greensill Capital is raising concerns for jobs, businesses and public finances, not just here in Scotland but across the UK and beyond. The Cabinet Secretary said that the Scottish Government is mitigating risks as far as it can. I wonder if he could elaborate on the action that has been taken and whether there are any constraints or barriers to acting more fully. Like Murdo Fraser, I was wanting to hear a bit more about the verification of what Mr Gupta has said about adequate funding for current needs, beyond the strength of his word. What particular action has been taken to check out what he has said to the Minister? And given that the wide-ranging interests of the GFG Alliance and its close connections to Greensill, can the Cabinet Secretary outline what action the Government will take, not just to protect these jobs and vital industries in the short term, but much more importantly for the longer term too?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, President Ross. I thank Monica Lennon for her question. She asks several questions, in fact, and I can say that the GFG Alliance are seeking to undertake a refinancing. This is a sensitive commercial matter, and we do need to be careful not to prejudice or undermine that process. We will do everything in our power to assist the steel and aluminium businesses and to support their highly skilled workers. And I stress that because, one of the things that we did back in 2016 was the realisation that the workers were redundant in DL, and therefore we devised a special skills course where they reskilled and they were retained. They weren't lost to the steel plant. If we hadn't done that, we would not have been able to reopen that steel plant. The cost of that intervention was, I have here, I think, just under £200,000. So there are a number of interventions that we can consider taking. We will leave no stone unturned to do that job. And we will continue to work very closely with the trade union representatives, as we did in DL back in 2016, where we had 13 meetings of the task force which I chaired, which is a very large group, which actually included at that time one Richard Leonard, who was at that point a trade union representative. But we did work very well with no politics, focused on the objective of providing a future for the jobs in DL. and that we have done thus far, but we are not complacent, and therefore we are doing everything we possibly can to secure that future further.
And the usual mantra, and it's not directed at you, Mr Rennie, but shorter questions, if I may, shorter answers. Willie Rennie, followed by John Finney.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. The Government told us 5 years ago that the multiplier and supply chain impacts in Lochaber would be worth 2,000 jobs. Are we ever going to see those jobs? And what discussions did he have with Mr Gupta about creating those jobs?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I ran over in my opening statement the answer to the number of jobs that have been provided. I think those are valuable. I hope the Liberal Democrats support that. They certainly do, I think, locally in Lochaber. I am pleased that we have received the safeguarding of 165 jobs, the creation of 44 new jobs at Lochaber. I'm pleased the company have assured us they've invested over £41 million in the business since taking over. And my understanding from their information is that that has included substantial investment in the value of the hydro assets and the further connection of the hydro assets to the national grid, thereby increasing the security value of the property. And of course, the problems facing the automotive sector meant that their original plans could not proceed. And that's simply a fact that nobody anticipated at 2016, not Mr Rennie, not me or anybody else, and COVID has intervened. However, the company have come forward with an amended plan which proposes a billets plant and a canning plant, and we are working with them, and indeed I was involved in chairing the Lochaber group that deals with the company on that matter. So there's challenges ahead, but we are working extremely hard with everybody in order to achieve delivery of these objectives.
John Finney, followed by Clare Adamson.
Thank you, President Officer, and can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for the statement and indeed for the Scottish Government's active involvement in the smelter. I know that the Cabinet Secretary knows it well. Cabinet Secretary, you were involved in the launch of a PR about the expansion plans. I think you're right to say it's important we don't have speculation. Are you able to talk about the status of that plan for the smelter at the moment, please?
Cabinet Secretary.
I'm not quite sure if I caught all of that, but I can say that the company's plans for expanding activities at Lochaber are in the public domain. I can share more information with Mr Finney on that, and they include, rather than the automotive sector and the wheels factory, the billets market, which is broader, I think, and offers real opportunities for job creation, and also a canning plant which would create some of the finest water for sale, Highland water for sale from Ben Nevis and the environs, and offers an exciting prospect. But the plans are detailed, the investment figures are clear, and I will endeavour to share that with members across the chamber.
Clare Adamson, followed by Jamie Halcro-Johnson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. My grandfather spent most of his working life in the DL mill, so I know just how much it meant to have those jobs and the production secured. Steel is synonymous with my constituency. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary, while I know what it means to my constituents in Motherwell and Wishaw, what does the steel sector mean to Scotland's economy and Scotland's future?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, you know, like Clare Adamson's family, many families in the centre of Scotland have the steel industry very close to their heart, and many people have seen their sons and indeed daughters work in the plant. And this is a story that we wish to continue, particularly as we explore low-carbon opportunities. So the workers at the plant do, I believe, want this positive story to be told and for their hard work to be recognised. I'll just finish by paying tribute to the trade union representatives who assisted me in the task force back in 2016, including the inspirational Steve McCool, Ross Clark, Derek Fearon, Richard Leonard, Kenny Jordan and David Tarrant, and indeed I had the pleasure of meeting up again with Ross Clark on Monday to thank him and the workforce for their great work for Scotland.
Jamie Halcro-Johnson, followed by Rona Mackay.
Thank you. I welcome the Cabinet Secretary's commitment to provide updates over the course of the coming recess. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary, in regards to the Fort William plant, when the plans were changed and announced, that the Cabinet Secretary gave his support and said support would be given by the Scottish Government. Can I ask, therefore, whether the Scottish Government has now reviewed the business plan for this facility and if, in their view, the plans are credible, and given the level of public support for the facility, what assurances he has sought from the company over the plans?
Cabinet Secretary.
I was closely involved, as were my officials, in very detailed work when we renegotiated the original plan that was approved by the Finance Committee in order to alter the business plan, moving away from the model which was reliant on the automotive sector for the reasons I've described earlier, towards more profitable opportunities. We also had professional advice on those plans before we ascribed our approval thereto. We had lengthy discussions and negotiations which are commercial about the basis of the alteration to plans, and we informed the Finance Committee of all of that work.
Rona Mackay, followed by Rhoda Grant.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary why it was important that the support only go to a business with plans for long-term operations of the Lochaber premises? And can I ask what has happened to those plans?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, there was one clear reason why we took the approach that we did in offering support only to businesses for long-term, with plans for long-term operations of the Lochaber businesses, including the smelter. And that was, if we hadn't done that, Presiding Officer, the outcome may have been that whereas the hydro asset would have found a purchaser, the smelter would not, and the last smelter in Britain would have shut. That was what motivated us then, and that's what motivates us now. And yes, the situation is challenging, but we are leaving no stone unturned to try to secure the future for the excellent workers at the Lochaber plant, who are proud of what they do, who are trading profitably, who are providing an excellent return to the local economy, and of which is part of the local culture in Fort William and Lochaber, very much so.
Rhoda Grant, followed by John Mason.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm pleased to receive the reassurance with regard to GFG Alliance's operations in Scotland, especially in Lochaber. When they purchased the Alcan estate and smelter in Lochaber, a commitment was made to the Scottish Government and indeed the community that they would transfer some of the vast estate to community ownership, and this would have created more jobs and also boosted the local economy. I understand from East Lochaber and Lager Community Trust that this has not happened. I therefore wrote to the Cabinet Secretary about this, but in his response he appeared to wash his hands off the matter. Therefore, can I prevail upon him to ensure that GFG Alliance make good their commitment to the community?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I don't think it's correct to say that I wash my hands of responsibility. I understand from the company that there were substantial discussions with community interests, including community councils, and that took place over a long period. There were also quite detailed discussions about one particular aspect or project which took place. There have also, I should say, been some substantial investments, I'm told, by the company in improving parts of the estate, the properties in the estate, supporting gamekeeping activities in the estate. So there has been investment in Johann estate that the company has advised us of, and I do recognise that there needs to be further discussion on all of these things, and of course looking at the potential community involvement is very much something that we would wish to encourage in taking things forward. Our primary focus, though, remains on preserving the plant and the jobs.
John Mason, followed by Edward Mountain.
Thank you very much. The Cabinet Secretary in his statement mentioned the figures of £14 and £32 million as being the guarantee that was approved in 2016, including by the Finance Committee, which at the time I don't think I was on. Can he clarify, does that mean that the £32 million is the maximum guarantee that we would be liable for in any 1 year, or does it accumulate in some way so that there's a lot higher liability?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I did set out in my statement the information I thought it correct to share with Parliament, and the annual figure repayments do vary. The agreement that we reached and the guarantee that we granted was, as Mr Mason says, one that was explained to and presented to the Finance Committee for their approval, as a contingent liability. At that time, Scottish ministers had to present all proposals to grant guarantees in excess of £1 million. The committee received itself detailed written advice on the proposed guarantee. It had the opportunity to discuss it with me and senior officials before granting approval, and it did include representation, as I've said, from across the political spectrum, and as I understand it, the decision by the committee to approve the facility was unanimous. And that cross-party support was welcome then, and it will be welcome now. And I very much hope that we will continue to see this cross-party approach. It's certainly what the workforces want from us, Presiding Officer.
Edwin Mountain, followed by Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I refer members to my register of interest in that I own a fishery on the River Spey, which water from which river goes down to Lochaber to this plant. Cabinet Secretary, before the Scottish Government agreed to the annual revenues guarantee under the Lochaber guarantee, what due diligence did they do on the generating infrastructure of the plant, or did they just take the due diligence undertaken by Mr Gupta?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, a whole range of due diligence was undertaken, as would be expected at the time of the original transaction, and that was conducted by employing leading firms and experts in relation to the various primary aspects that we had to check in this transaction. So I'm confident that we approached this and carried out due diligence as appropriate, Presiding Officer, and the Finance Committee, cross-party Finance Committee, played their scrutiny role as rightly they were required to do, and they concluded every single member, every single party to give support to the measure, and that was very satisfactory.
Kenneth Gibson, followed by David Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And as a former employee of British Steel for more than 4 years who actually worked at DL, I do have considerable concerns about the future of the industry. Is the Cabinet Secretary convinced that the steel industry does have a long-term future in Scotland, and that we are a prosperous one, and that the workers' jobs will indeed be there, not just for themselves, but hopefully for future generations?
Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, well, my ministerial colleagues have carried out work in respect of the long-term future of the steel industry, and the answer is yes, we do very much believe that there is such a long-term future, and I think I did allude to the fact that the market and the prices in steel are very satisfactory, higher than for some considerable time, and as we emerge from COVID, I think there is optimism within the sector. And therefore, the task facing us now is to overcome current challenges, because we do have the capacity to continue to trade on what we understand from the company is a profitable basis.
David Stewart, followed by Bob Doris.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In his statement, the Cabinet Secretary made positive points about the Lochaber smelter, which I wholeheartedly endorse. Does the Cabinet Secretary share my view that the smelter is in good financial health, with a strong order book and new investment on stream? And finally, will the Cabinet Secretary do everything in his power to ensure that the smelter continues to be an active ingredient in Scotland's industrial strategy?
Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, I do. Yes, I will. I'm extremely grateful for Mr Stewart's continued support, Presiding Officer. And could I just say, as I think this might be his last contribution, and as David Stewart and myself have known each other since, I think, 1990, when we first stood against each other, that his presence here will be sorely missed. I think he's one of a small band of politicians that has been both a councillor, an MP and an MSP over a long period of devoted service to constituents in the Highlands. And over all that period of over 3 decades of working with David, he and I have had an almost always a constructive relationship. Almost invariably, he's pursued his campaigns with persistence, but always with courtesy, and he will be a sad loss to this Parliament, but I wish him, Linda and his family very well.
And Bob Doris.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. I'm aware that we're about to enter a period of parliamentary dissolution, but that said, what's the single most important thing we as members of this Parliament can do to help right now try and maintain these jobs and reassure worried workers and their families?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, as one reads newspapers which are full of speculation, what one doesn't tend to see in those columns of comment is any consideration of the workforce. And what I really found from, what really struck me from meeting with the trade union representatives on Monday is the sense of commitment and enthusiasm of the workforce to continue doing the great work they do, both in DL and in Fort William. So I think what the single most important thing we do is bear in mind that it is the workers who should be uppermost in our thoughts, the 200 at Lochaber, 140 at DL. And obviously they deserve that we all act responsibly here.
Thank you. That concludes the question of the statement. It's time to move on to the next item of business after a short pause.
Thank you, colleagues. We're going to move to the next item of business, which is a Stage 3 proceedings on the Dogs Protection of Livestock Amendment Scotland Bill. So in dealing with the bill, the amendment, the members should have with them the marshal's list. The bill is amended at Stage 2 and the grouping of amendments. Just remind members that if we do have a vote, the division bell will sound and will be suspended for 5 minutes. Each vote will last 1 minute. If anybody wishes to speak on a group on the amendments, just press your button as soon as I call the group. So I'm going to turn now to the amendments. Group 1, minor and technical. Can I call Amendment 1 in the name of Emma Harper? This is grouped with Amendments 2, 3 and 4. Emma Harper to move Amendment 1 and speak to all the amendments in the group.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm happy to move Amendment 1 and speak to all amendments in this group. I know they are minor and technical. At Stage 2, the Rural Economy and Connectivity Committee agreed an amendment lodged by Jamie Halcro Johnston, and the aim of which was to clarify that woodland used for grazing should be included within the definition of agricultural land. I had no strong views on whether the change was needed, but as the Minister and the committee believed that the change would be helpful, I supported the amendment. Technical issues were subsequently identified with the drafting of Mr Halcro Johnston's Stage 2 amendment, and Amendments 1 and 2 rectify those deficiencies. There is no change to the substantive effect of Mr Halcro Johnston's amendment. Amendment 3 seeks to remove Section 8 of the bill. Section 129 of the Civic Government Scotland Act 1982 provides a defence for anyone who has killed or injured a dog if this was done in order to defend livestock from attack by the dog. At the time the bill was being drafted, we thought it sensible to amend the terminology of this section in line with the changes we were making to the Dogs Protection of Livestock Act 1953. and to ensure the same definition of livestock was used in both acts. However, at a late stage, it was pointed out to me that Section 129 had already been repealed, except to the extent that it provides a definition of livestock for the purposes of Section 74 of the 1982 Civic Government Act. Section 74 of the 1982 Act allows people who find living creatures other than stray dogs or livestock to keep them if they're unclaimed after 2 months. As Section 121 no longer had any relevance to protecting livestock, there is no longer any need for the bill to amend it. Accordingly, Section 8 of the bill can be removed. Amendment 4 is a minor tidying up amendment. Section 9 includes within the provisions to be commenced the day after royal assent that Section 6 of Section 6.4, but Section 6.4 merely provides for the parliamentary procedure for regulations made under the power created by 6.3, and there is no point in commencing one ahead of the other. This anomaly has come about because in the original bill, Section 6.4 also provided the parliamentary procedure for regulations to appoint inspecting bodies. Once that power was removed at stage 2, there was no longer any need for early commencement of Section 6.4. This amendment clarifies these commencement timing issues, so I move Amendment 1, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much, Ms Harper. And can I call Jamie Halcro Johnston?
Thank you very much indeed. I was going to actually ask Emma Harper a little bit more clarification on Amendment 3, but she's done that there. So I'll just thank her and the Minister for their constructive approach to my vitally important clarification on grazing. Thank you. And we'll be supporting all amendments.
Thank you, Mr Halcro Johnston. And could I call the Minister, Ben McPherson?
Thank you, Presiding Officer, for the opportunity to respond. Scottish Ministers fully support these technical amendments which improve the drafting of this important piece of legislation. Thank you.
Short and sweet. Does Ms Harper wish to add anything by way of winding up?
No, Presiding Officer. I'm just happy that these minor and technical amendments are in the bill, and I'm happy to proceed.
Thank you very much, Ms Harper. The question is that Amendment 1 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Can I call Amendments 2, 3 and 4 and invite Ms Harper to move them on block?
Move on block.
Thank you. Does any member object if I put the questions on block? No. The question, therefore, is that Amendments 2 to 4 are agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed, and that ends consideration of amendments. So, now, as members may be aware, at this point in proceedings, I am required under standing orders to decide whether or not, in my view, any provision of this bill relates to a protected subject matter, that is, whether it modifies the electoral system or franchise for Scottish parliamentary elections. In the case of this bill, in my view, it does no such thing. Therefore, the Dogs Protection of Livestock Amendment Scotland Bill does not require a supermajority to be passed at stage 3. So we're going to move to the next item of business. We'll just pause, actually, and we'll just, Presiding Officer and I will change seats and move to the next item of business. Short pause.
Thank you very much. The next item of business is a Stage 3 debate on Motion 24270 in the name of Emma Harper on the Dogs Protection of Livestock Amendment Scotland Bill. Members should note that the question on the motion will be taken immediately following the conclusion of the debate, and can invite members who wish to speak in the debate to press the request to speak buttons now. And I call on Emma Harper to speak to and move the motion.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Well, I am wheel chuffed to open today's Stage 3 debate on my Dogs Protection of Livestock Amendment Scotland Bill. I am pleased that this bill that I have worked on for more than 4 years has had unanimous cross-party support, and it is the last bill that will be passed by this chamber in this parliamentary session. Presiding Officer, the bill came about because in my work as an MSP, I heard about many horrific incidents of dogs attacking sheep and kye and other livestock. And in pursuing this, I discovered the current legislation, which is now 68 years old, was seriously outdated and needed to be modernised. I have also discovered that incidents of livestock attacks were actually underreported by farmers and crofters. And Police Scotland, in its evidence to the committee, said that the old law, and I quote, has not kept pace with evolving practices within the farming industry. Some terminology is outdated, plus it does not provide sufficient deterrent that could influence an owner or person in charge of a dog to act with greater responsibility. End my quotes. It's lambing season right now, Presiding Officer. The fields are full of pregnant ewes and new lambs. It's very distressing to see the photos of carnage of dead sheep and lambs from attacks by out-of-control dogs. These tragic incidents dramatically highlight why this bill is needed. This bill extends the definition of livestock to include llamas, alpacas and buffaloes, which were not covered by the 1953 Act. And it expands and modernises the definitions of worrying to include chase, attack and kill. It also gives additional powers to the police to allow them to seize and detain a dog suspected of livestock attack on agricultural land for the purposes of identifying and securing evidence of the offence. The bill will increase the maximum penalties for this crime to be in line with last year's animal welfare legislation introduced by the government. Presiding Officer, during the progress of the bill, we've heard and seen evidence of the devastating impact that incidents of livestock worrying and attacks can have both on animals and farmers, financially and emotionally. And sadly, these attacks continue to increase in number, as reported recently in the media. During this COVID lockdown, we've seen how important it is for our physical and mental health to be able to access our wonderful countryside, and there are more and more people doing just that. I encourage everyone to spend time in nature, enjoying the benefits it gives, and to do so responsibly. I'm a dog owner myself, and I enjoy accessing the countryside with my twa dogs. This bill will make a real difference to farmers and will, I hope, help to educate everyone about the importance of keeping your dogs under control around livestock. I hope we will see year-on-year reduction in incidents of worrying and attack and a rise in responsible access to our stunning countryside. Presiding Officer, I'd like to say thank you to a number of people and organisations in my closing without whom we wouldn't be here today. But now I want to thank the Parliament's Rural Economy and Connectivity Committee and the DPLR committees for their scrutiny, and my MSP colleagues for their support, and of course the Scottish Government Ministers Mary Goujon, Ben McPherson and their officials. And a huge thank you goes to Mary Dinsdale, Nick Hawthorne and Kenny Heitkin from the Non-Government Bills Unit, and Charles Livingston, the bill drafter, and of course to my office manager, Scott McIlvany, who has supported me from the beginning and who has helped us get to stage 3 today. More thanks will be made in my closing because this has been a real collaborative effort. So, Presiding Officer, in conclusion, I want to welcome the cross-party way in which this bill has been taken forward, the suggested changes and the amendments from the committee members and from the Government. And I believe now we have a piece of legislation which will really make a difference to farmers and crofters across Scotland and will promote responsible access to our braw and bonny countryside, some of the best which can be experienced in Galloway. I therefore move that the Dogs Protection of Livestock Amendment Scotland Bill be passed.
Thank you very much. And I call on Ben McPherson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I'm pleased to speak on behalf of the Scottish Government in support of this important piece of legislation that will do much to protect livestock all across Scotland. I want to thank Emma Harper, MSP, once again for her constructive and collaborative approach in bringing this bill to Parliament. A Members' Bill does not reach this stage without significant commitment and a great deal of effort. And I know how much work Emma has put into this bill, particularly in the consultation stage, to hear from and listen to a wide spectrum of views. Scott, in her parliamentary office, has also been essential to this work. And so too have Parliament officials, particularly the Parliament's non-government bills team. And also, so have Scottish Government officials. and I would like to pay tribute to my officials and the work that they've done on this legislation and more widely. I also want to thank the Rural Economy and Connectivity Committee for the role it has played in hearing evidence and in producing helpful recommendations at stage 1, which we considered carefully, leading to the changes brought in at stage 2 and a bill which now undoubtedly provides a modernised statutory framework on livestock worrying. Scottish ministers are keen to emphasise that responsibility for investigating the criminal offence of livestock worrying shall remain solely with the police, with assistance from local authorities or the Scottish SPCA as appropriate in the circumstances. Throughout the bill process, we have worked with key partners and stakeholders to clarify roles and responsibilities and increase understanding about what private vets may be asked to do in relation to investigating livestock worrying incidents. As a result, I can advise Parliament that a simple protocol for vets in private practice will be drawn up, which will be endorsed and publicised by all relevant parties, including making this available to police officers. This protocol will be available before the new powers to have dogs examined are expected to come into force later this year, and will give suitable prominence to the point that Police Scotland, as the investigating authority, will pay for any investigative work they request. And this should provide reassurance to Peter Chapman and others who were interested in this point at stage 2. Presiding Officer, there is no doubt that farmers and crofters care deeply about the welfare of their livestock, and this bill will help ensure that all animals commonly farmed in Scotland receive the protection from attack that they deserve. Some members may have noticed that the Scottish Government and the Scottish SPCA have been running a responsible dog ownership campaign, and although not solely focused on livestock worrying, it emphasises the importance of training pet dogs correctly, reminding dog owners that they have a legal responsibility to ensure their dog is kept under proper control in order to prevent and reduce the risk of incidents occurring. And the campaign offers dog owners practical tips and advice to ensure they know the steps to take to prevent their dog from getting out of control and causing harm to others and indeed livestock. It will be necessary to halt this as we move into the pre-election period, but I hope a future government will consider running it again because education is key to ending livestock worrying incidents and the associated unnecessary suffering for all concerned. Presiding Officer, it is not often that the government comes into stage 3 having very little to say in terms of amendments. On this bill, we have had none, and this is a clear signal of the bill's success through members working collaboratively throughout the legislative process and therefore producing a bill before us that is worthy of Emma Harper's hard work and everyone else who has contributed. And I hope members will pass it today unanimously. And indeed, in the circumstances that we're in, I reflect on my first speech in this Parliament 5 years ago, where I stated that we share a unifying hope for a better Scotland across all parties, perspectives and constituencies. And I think we would do well to keep that in mind, and this bill is a good example of when we work together, we can produce effective legislation and also make positive change for the common good of all of Scotland. Please support the bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. I now call Jamie Halcro Johnston to be followed by Colin Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I firstly draw the Chamber's attention to my register of interest as a partner in a farming business and a member of NFU Scotland. I'm pleased once again to have the opportunity to speak on this bill at the final stage and as one of the final items of business in this parliamentary session. This will, I hope, be the 7th member's bill to pass at stage 3 in this session, and I again commend Emma Harper for guiding it through the Parliament. This is one of the bills where I've had the pleasure to speak at all stages, having come before us at the Rural Economy and Connectivity Committee at stage 2. And I was even able to add a few words, clarifying the bill's coverage of woodland grazing, which the Minister graciously remarked was both helpful and probably unnecessary. However, I am pleased that the clarity is there, and Scotland's woodland grazers will rest a little bit easier in their forests, orchards and thickets once the bill is passed, as will many other livestock farmers across our country who this bill defends. More seriously, in the 2 decades of this Parliament, members' bills have served to get a number of important issues onto the floor of this chamber for debate, and on many occasions affected real significant change. And it's a positive feature of this Parliament that these bills arise. As Emma Harper sets out, this bill will update legislation on livestock protection drafted in the mid-1950s. It recognises that time and context has moved on. And while the broad principles were agreed, this has not been an easy bill. There has been significant amendment reflecting the findings of the Stage 1 report. But the members' positive and consensual approach, however, has aided this process considerably. There are 2 very worthwhile objectives behind the bill. The first is animal welfare. At Stage 1, we heard many examples of injuries and distress that livestock can face from attacks and worrying incidents. Many of us will have very direct experience of that with a number of farmers represented in this chamber. The second objective is to address the economic harm that occurs from damage to livestock. Incidents that this bill sets out to guard against can have considerable costs. We know all too well that farming today often runs on tight margins and that livestock are a valuable asset. And dog attacks can often be very distressing to livestock owners in their own right. As I mentioned at Stage 1, this bill is far from anti-dog. As a big supporter of Holyrood Dog of the Year, my pro-dog credentials are well known. However, too often, owners are not providing the proper control of dogs in rural areas, and in some cases this is bred by indifference, but on other occasions it is ignorance. The Dogs Trust supporting the bill has highlighted the many occasions where worrying incidents can take place without the owner present. Dogs may have escaped from a garden or been left out unaccompanied. That's why it's important that information campaigns are run, that school pupils, even in our urban communities, learn the countryside code, and that everyone in our rural communities recognises the dangers that can occur. Prevention is key here. Our countryside is the heritage of everyone, and visitors are valued. But it is important that we are all sensitive to the fact that Scotland's rural areas are not just beauty spots. They are the workplace for many thousands of people, and that brings its own risks and dangers. And understanding them and the people who populate them is vital. I'll not dwell long on the amendments today. They are largely technical changes that improve the bill and tie up loose ends from the volume of work that was undertaken in committee. This is, however, a very changed bill as a result of Stage 2. The direction it has taken has narrowed its scope a little, but has also provided a considerable improvement. The Minister's work to ensure that penalties fitted well into recent reforms to animal legislation was a welcome step. My colleague Peter Chapman, with his considerable experience, brought forward important amendments around specialist veterinary care and the allocation of costs, recognising the practicalities around examinations in practice and on the ground. And John Finney made an important point in committee that much of this work will hinge on the protocols and working relationships between farmers, vets, the police and the Crown in relation to evidence recovery. Significantly, Emma Harper's changes reflected the considered view of the committee and the evidence it heard. Presiding officer, this bill tackles a perennial issue of complaint in Scotland's countryside, one that can cause considerable harm to both livestock and people working our land. As others have said today, can I add my thanks to all those who have contributed to improving this bill and supporting its progress, from those in the sector who have provided evidence, to our always exceptional committee and legislative teams for their work on pulling together the Stage 1 report and Stage 2 amendments. The bill has reached Stage 3 thanks to the positive efforts of members across this chamber in the best traditions of this Parliament, and I offer again my congratulations to Emma Harper. I'm pleased to say it will gain the support of this side of the chamber at decision time this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call Colin Smith to be followed by Mike Rumbles.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This bill is a positive step for both Scotland's agriculture sector and our animal welfare standards. So Labour is happy to support it today, and I'd like to thank Emma Harper for bringing the bill forward. Although I've now passed the baton on as Labour's rural economy spokesperson to my colleague Rhoda Grant, a spokesperson for the last 3.5 years as a member of the Rural Economy and Connectivity Committee, and as an MSP who represents a large rural region, I've all too often heard how common livestock worrying is and the often devastating welfare, financial and emotional impact it can have. NFUS highlighted a recent members' survey which found that 72% of their members had been affected by livestock worrying, while Scottish Government estimates suggest each incident costs an average of almost £700. Particularly alarming was the concerns raised by a number of stakeholders that rates of livestock worrying are on the rise. So, Presiding Officer, it's clear from the evidence that more needs to be done to tackle the scourge of livestock worrying. Part of that is legislative change. The first Dogs Protection of Livestock Act is almost 50 years old, and sadly, like far too much of our animal welfare legislation, is badly in need of update. This bill will help deliver that, and when it comes to livestock worrying. But it's important to get that legislation right. So I'm pleased that as the bill passed through Parliament, that the member in charge, Emma Harper, took on board many of the concerns about the initial bill raised by myself and the rest of the Rural Economy Committee in our Stage 1 report. The bill was much improved during the Stage 2 process, and as a result, I'm pleased we have been able to get to a position where it seems all parties can not only vote for the bill, but do so with confidence that it will help deliver the robust legal context needed. I hope it will be a first step towards making meaningful progress in reducing the rates of livestock worrying. But of course, prevention is always better than punishment, and the passage of this bill must be a starting point to consider what more needs to be done to tackle the issue more widely. A key aspect of this must be a strong awareness campaign, communicating not only the specific effects of the new laws, but also the seriousness of livestock worrying in general and the practical steps that can be taken to avoid it. Indeed, in a response to the committee's Stage 1 report, Emma Harper noted that, I quote, "In most cases, incidents of livestock worrying and attack are likely not premeditated and often lack intent to cause harm." A number of stakeholders also made this point as the bill passed its way through Parliament. The National Dog Warden Association Scotland noted that most dog owners do not believe their dog is likely to attack sheep and are shocked and distraught after the event. And Battersea Dogs and Cats Home pointed out that livestock worrying often occurs when the owner himself is not even present. Changing the law won't tackle that, but raising awareness of livestock worrying and how to prevent it may help. The laws introduced in this bill and the 1953 Act are undoubtedly needed, but our aim needs to be that they are used as little as possible. That means a strong awareness campaign accompanying the bill, but also longer-term measures such as a consistent education and improved infrastructure and signage. In order to understand the issue and monitor our progress in tackling it, we also need more information on the scale of the problem. Dogs Trust have highlighted this, pointing out that, in their words, by working to better understand the problem, we believe it will be possible to undertake targeted, proactive measures that aim to result in the prevention of worrying, therefore protecting the welfare of livestock more robustly. Stakeholders from a range of backgrounds also highlighted how under-reporting and inconsistent data collection make it difficult to get a clear idea of just how common the problem is. This needs to be addressed if we are to ensure the new laws and any related measures are working as intended. Finally, while I'm pleased that this particular issue has been addressed now, I'm disappointed it's not happening as part of a wider review of dog control laws. A comprehensive review of these laws is badly needed, and I hope this will be taken forward in the next parliamentary session. However, I'm pleased to be voting for this bill today, and I congratulate Emma Harper for her work getting the bill to this point, and everyone who's been involved in developing and improving the bill throughout the process. This is a welcome change with cross-party support that will provide farmers and crofters with reassurance that the issue of livestock worrying is being taken seriously by all parties. And it's another important small step in the progress being made to improve Scotland's animal welfare regime. There remains, however, an awful lot more still to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call Mike Rumbles, who will be making his final speech in this Parliament. Mike Rumbles.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I too congratulate Emma Harper for bringing forward this bill, and it's good to get it passed before the session ends. Last minute, but still good. My one major concern about the bill has been addressed, which was the initial intention to give the police the power to search non-domestic premises without a warrant. This was the second time in this parliamentary session that this idea had appeared in legislation. The first time in the government's UEFA bill, and now in this one, and I thank the Minister, particularly Ben McPherson, for looking at this. Thankfully, on both occasions, it was recognised that this would have overridden historic safeguards in our common law, designed to protect people from allowing the authorities to go searching people's property without first obtaining evidence of a crime. Thank goodness common sense prevailed, but it just shows that vigilance is always required from MSPs when examining legislation from the government, from committees, from individual MSPs. Presiding Officer, if you would indulge me just for a moment, considering that this is my last speech in Parliament, for me to make a general comment on the work of MSPs. Since I was first elected some 22 years ago, I've seen a marked change in the, if I may say so, the independence of mind of MSP colleagues across the board. I'm not singling anybody out. When it comes to voting in the Scottish Parliament, we have collectively become far more tribal, and unfortunately my party right or wrong. And I would urge those colleagues who are returned at the election to consider this. It's fine when the following three elements are aligned. Firstly, your own values and beliefs, the interests of your constituents, and your party's leadership decisions. Unfortunately, in politics, these don't always neatly align. For me, the most important of these three elements is to remain true to the values and beliefs which brought you to Parliament in the first place, especially when considering which way to vote at decision time. And it's everybody's decision. I'll give just one example about what I mean. When we had the vote on closing our churches during this pandemic, today's judgment from Lord Braid ruled that this was unconstitutional, disproportionate and consequently unlawful. Yet how many colleagues voted against their better judgment? Because only 5 of us, only 5, voted against our own party's position on this. And it was every party's position to support the government in closing down the churches. So my message to returning MSPs is simply this. Do value your own judgment and always do what you believe is the right thing. Now, Presiding Officer, you can see why my party leaders over the years, Jim Wallace, Nicola Stephen, Tavish Scott and now Willie Rennie, have not had an easy time from me. But I do thank them for their forbearance. And on that point, Presiding Officer, I'll end my 17 years of contributions to parliamentary debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Rumbles. And I now call John Finney, who is also making his final speech in Parliament. John Finney.
Thank you very much indeed, Presiding Officer. And like others before, I would like to thank everyone who's brought us to this point in the bill and congratulate Emma Harper, who's worked extremely hard over 4 years, as we've heard, and success will arrive in a very short time. And this bill will achieve the success it deserves. Within the last fortnight in Sutherland, just north of me here, was a serious incident of 5 sheep killed, other beasts traumatised, as would be the owners, the neighbours and the police investigating the incident. I certainly know as a young officer in the 80s, I was called to a scene of carnage, many sheep killed, numerous others injured, required to be humanely destroyed. At the request of the owners of the dogs, good folk whom I knew, I assisted the vet, a good vet whom I knew, to put down dogs that I knew. So I'm acutely aware of the wider implications of an incident like that in a rural community. And as has been said, legislation alone won't stop livestock worrying, but this enhanced legislation, including new protection from my dear friends the camelids, I'm a big alpaca fan, is needed and will help. Education is the key, so I welcome the recent Scottish Government social media campaign that the Minister alluded to. This is entirely about responsible dog ownership. And Scottish Greens will support the bill at decision time tonight. Like Mr Rumbles before me, Presiding Officer, if you could perhaps indulge me, Hamas na Clúin, Balach Bakes Dog, Retuv Lochlochi, Pashkira Yers. So for these reasons, it's been a real honour to represent the Highlands and Islands in the Parliament. And I thank the constituents for the privilege to do so. The day after I was elected in 2011, I arrived at the Parliament building for the very first time with my former colleague Dave Thompson, MSP. We were greeted by a smile with the security officer. We immediately met, then Paul Grice, the Chief Executive, had a blether. And from that day to this, that's the way that engagement has been with the Parliament and its staff. So can I take the opportunity to thank the present Chief Executive, David McGill, and each and every one of the parliamentary staff for their courtesy and assistance, and likewise British Government officials. I've enjoyed my parliamentary work, particularly helping constituents, and to that end I could not have been better served and by Linda Wilson, excuse me, in my constituency office throughout both terms. Linda's courteous and engaging manner has been invaluable in us helping countless communities, and she can be very proud of the support she's given to communities of the Highlands and Islands. Thanks too to past employees Richard, Pauline and Gary, and to Kevin and more recently Liam, both real wordsmiths who have been of great help to me. My long-suffering office manager, Stephen Dane, has been with me since the start in 2011 and tirelessly kept me on course with all things parliamentary. Stephen was pivotal in progression of the Equal Protection Bill into law. And we're both very proud of being part of a big, big team behind the bill. I value staff and will forever be in their debt. I value our Parliament too, and in the relatively short time it's been in place, it's brought great progress to our country. I always want to be forward-looking and positive, Presiding Officer. However, I must say I've been dismayed, indeed angered by those, particularly of late, who have sought to undermine our Parliament and our institutions for their shabby ends. Fortunately, Session 5 of the Parliament will not be marked by their wrecking crew's activities. Rather, it will be remembered because of progressive legislation, such as the Domestic Abuse Bill, the Redress for Survivors of Historical Child Abuse and Care Bill, the Period Products Bill, and many more. And dare I say it, my own Equal Protection Bill, without which the historic UN Convention of the Rights of the Child Incorporation Bill would not have been possible. Presiding Officer, soon I hope our Parliament is going to have to raise its horizons even further, a magnificent chamber resonating to new voices and wider issues. Debates about Scotland's foreign policy, Scotland's defence policy, and all the powers meantime held elsewhere. Because I believe it's only a matter of when, rather than if, Scotland takes its place at the UN as an independent nation and rejoins our European friends. Excuse me. Like many, I've spent the last year working entirely from home, and I thank my wife of 45 years, Bernadette, for her endless support and forbearance. Perhaps one final debrief for her after today's events, following which I promise no more running commentaries on the political business of the day. In a year like no other, I thank all those who have helped our communities in whatever capacity and pay tribute to the Presiding Officer, Ken McIntosh, and the Deputy Presiding Officers, the Cabinet Secretary for Health, Dean Freeman, and our First Minister for their leadership. I thank my dear Green colleagues and our super Green staff, indeed colleagues across the chamber, past and present, for their camaraderie, and wish those standing down healthy and less demanding days ahead. New members are coming, Presiding Officer, and I'm delighted our Parliament will welcome more women. I hope my successor as lead candidate, the talented Ariane Burgess, my dear friend Gillian McKay, and yes, indeed, my daughter Ruth Dwyer, of whom I'm very proud, will be amongst that growing number. However, no matter how the next Parliament is configured, I wish everyone well, discharging their sworn duty of public service. So, Presiding Officer, one last time, Warren Tanga Hula Dunya is cheery.
Warren Tang, Master Finney. 3-minute contributions, please, from members. Christine Graham, to be followed by Claudia Beamish.
I can see people round the chamber timing me before I even start. Can I wish John Finney and Mike Rumbles well, but in particular Cabinet Secretary Rosanna Cunningham. I believe this is her final speech. Few of the 99ers are left. I'm struggling on. Hope to be returned. They'll need to shoot me like a whole horse. Anyway, I'm pleased to speak in this debate on Emma Harper's bill, not only as convener of the cross-party group on animal welfare, but as someone whose constituency straddles farms in Midlothian and the borders, and as a colleague who substituted on the REC committee for Emma Harper during the evidence session. And I must commend Edward Mountain in trying to chair me. It's a difficult job. But as someone also in previous sessions has brought forward my own members' bills, sometimes with success, such as the Control of Dogs Scotland Act 2010. So, I know how tough it is for a member to get this far and how long it takes, even with the excellent expertise of the Non-Government Bills Unit. I think Emma Harper has been progressing this bill since 2017, so it's a very long gestation. This bill addresses the horrendous issue of the worrying and savaging of farm livestock by unattended or out-of-control dogs, carrying a high welfare risk for livestock and fatalities. The impact on farmers is not only financial, with veterinarian cost, the replacement of lost animals, but perhaps most of all, emotional, as they deal with half-dead and mutilated dying animals. Now, the dog is not to blame, and the majority of dog owners do walk their animals responsibly in all environments, and a farm is a working environment. As usual, it's the minority, either through ignorance or willfully, who let their dogs run wild. The proposed increases, with a maximum availability penalty of a fine up to £40,000 and or up to 12 months imprisonment, is long overdue. And indeed, with the upsurge in dog ownership during COVID, this bill could not be timelier. Its penalties are important, I hope, reflecting the culpability of the dog owner, but I hope also as a deterrent. And this bill should be a vehicle to educate dog owners on their responsibilities in the working countryside. But I have two asks of the Scottish Government, as this bill, I hope, is passed at decision time. One, that it receives the publicity from the Government it gives to its own bills, something I've been banging on about for years. And secondly, we have at last a national database linked to the existing microchip data of Scotland's dogs population, bringing together dog control notices and offences under this bill. That way, serial offending owners cannot dodge being identified. Finally, many congratulations to my colleague on what will be a well-earned success at decision time, and 5 seconds left. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Very timely contribution. I now call Claudia Beamish to be followed by Clare Adamson.
Right, thank you, Presiding Officer, and I've been frantically trying to cut my speech from 4 to 3, but I'll do my best. I would really like to thank Emma Harper for bringing forward the Dogs Protection of Livestock Amendment Scotland Bill. What a lot of work for all involved. And I'm keenly aware of how necessary this legislation is. Much of the South Scotland area, which I represent, like Emma Harper, is so rural, and dog worrying and livestock is an issue regularly raised by many constituents, especially those in the farming community itself. I meet regularly with NFUS, and this issue is never far from the agenda. Jen Craig, who is the chair of the National Sheep Association and NFUS Clydesdale branch chair, farms in my region, and has expressed real concern. She says dog worrying and attacks on livestock is a problem that is becoming more and more frequent, and in some cases more severe. Not only are the livestock suffering, but so are the farmers and the stocksmen and women who care for them and who witness these incidents. And she added, this is not the dog's fault, something I completely agree with. She said it's a 5-second decision that the owner takes not to put their dog on a lead that can lead to such horrific incidents. And Tom French, formerly chair of the NFU in my region of Forth and Clyde, also a good friend and a farmer in Crawford John, and I quote him as well, says it was very often the distress caused to the animals themselves as they are chased that can be overlooked and not appreciated or even recognised by those whom the dogs are supposed to be under the control of. And he's also heard of people who think their dog is just, and I quote, having fun, unquote, as an attack is underway. He added the behaviour of such as this is irresponsible and is one of the reasons some farmers are understandably cautious and worried about the increasing numbers of members of the public taking to access in the future. However, the benefits and well-being that the outdoors bring should be encouraged. For example, I fully support the work and work with organisations like Paths for All and in my own constituency of Clydesdale, the Healthy Valleys, who run successful dementia walks in my local area. These prove wonderful opportunities for people to experience the pleasures that walks can bring, and they take their well-behaved pets with them often, who are very welcome. I am also proud that Scottish Labour's introduction of the first Land Reform Act in 2005 gave the statutory right to roam, but this comes with a public responsibility. And Emma Harper's bill, if passed, which I'm sure it will be, I hope it will be tonight, will be a tangible reminder of that responsibility to all concerned. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I call Clare Adamson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I offer congratulations to all members who are leaving, this will be their final day, and for the contributions here from particularly Mike Rumbles and Mr Finlay. But if I could just say a special a special wish to the Lanarkshire Lassies. In 2011, I joined a very elite group, Linda Fabiani, Christina McKelvey, Aileen MacLeod and Aileen Campbell. Formidable women, one and all, and they have been my mentors, my friends and my support. And I wish Miss Campbell and Miss Fabiani the very best going forward. From the Lanarkshire Lassies to our Galloway lass, Emma Harper, and a huge congratulations on the bill's progress today. It demonstrates her commitment to animal welfare that she's shown throughout her time in the Parliament. Timely reminder today of her work after another family has been left devastated by a pup dying within 6 days, purchased from a puppy farm. And this important work by Miss Harper, she has done it in conjunction with the SSPCA. And I also note that the work on this bill has had them involved from the start. And it's a great partnership that has been established by Miss Harper with the SSPCA. And I thank them for their contribution to this bill too. Owning a dog is a wonderful experience, and I thank Mr McPherson for his comments about dog ownership. It's one of the most wonderful things that a family can do, but it comes with a huge responsibility, and we have to ensure that our dogs are under control at all times. I'm struck many times by the number of people I know who are surprised by their dog's behaviour, and this is something we have to really educate people about. They are animals, they have an instinct, and whether that's engaging with wildlife, in our countryside, in our gardens, or even on our shorelines. We've seen a recent attack of a seal on our shorelines, very, very unexpected to the dog owner, that happening. And this is why we must educate, and why education is absolutely key to going forward with this. And I thank charities such as the SSPCA, the Dog Trust and Battersea Dog Home for the support they give to dog owners in this respect. I thank Mr Halcro Johnston for noting that we live in a shared environment. What's a walkway for some place and a stroll in an afternoon is a commercial organisation, and those have to be respected. This bill actually covers all our livestock, and I think that's really important. So llamas, sheep farming, Sakai, Miss Harper mentioned earlier. And I'll finish by saying, if my good friend and colleague Rob Gibson was still here, I'm sure he'd be saying even extends to the buffalo in the farm in Ockletalbuie. Thank you very much, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. A very brief contribution from John Scott before we move to closing speeches.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, for your indulgence. I have very little to say except to welcome the passage of this bill and declare an interest. Yes, thank you for your sedentary intervention, Cabinet Secretary Rosanna. But I want to declare an interest as a sheep farmer and welcome this bill brought forward by Harper. And I do so in a heartfelt way, having twice had my in-lamb ewes worried by dogs. There is no worse sight than finding ewes with their throats ripped open and also the stomachs burst and dead lambs lying around. And owners of dogs don't appear to care or understand the damage they have done, not just to the dead and dying animals, but to the whole flock that survive, some of them survive, leading to subsequent abortions and hypoglycemic ewes. So I'm delighted that this bill has been brought forward today by Emma Harper, and I wish it every success. And thank you for your indulgence, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr Scott. We now move to closing speeches, and I call Rhoda Grant.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I would also like to congratulate Emma Harper for bringing forward this bill, as others have. And I'd also like to pay tribute to Mike Rumbles and John Finney on their final speeches, and to you also, Presiding Officer, as this will be your last session in the Parliament as well. I'm really pleased that Emma Harper has brought this bill forward, because I think even in this short debate today, it has shown the devastation that can be caused by dogs chasing animals, chasing sheep. Pregnant ewes can abort their lambs, as Emma Harper said. It's absolutely distressing to animals. Claudia Beamish talked about that in her speech about owners thinking their dogs are just having fun, and that's what dogs do. But those animals are being absolutely terrorised. And if the owner saw another animal terrorising their dogs, they would see the distress it can cause. So there's not a hierarchy of animals here. Dogs can kill sheep, as John Scott said, as he painted a very vivid picture of sometimes what meets a farmer or crofter when they've had been subject to a sheep worrying incident. It's devastating to find it, absolutely heartbreaking, because those are somebody's animals, an animal that people have cared for, but it can also be costly. They can lose a huge amount of money. And Colin Smith told us that most dog owners don't know that their dogs are likely to attack sheep, and are quite often shocked and distraught by this, but they can't understand how their dogs will react in that situation. And as Clare Adams said, it's an instinct built into a lot of dogs when they see sheep, that they will immediately start chasing them, and that can become biting them and actually killing them as well. Claudia Beamish highlighted that a lot more people are going out into the country, and that means that it is becoming a lot more common. A statistic Colin Smith mentioned that the NFUS was saying that 72% of their members had been affected by that. That's a huge number of farmers being affected by sheep worrying. And he also mentioned that the average cost is £700, which, if you add that up, comes to a huge sum of money. Not money just lost to the individuals, but money lost to the rural economy as well. I also support what Colin Smith talked about regarding data, because we won't be able to see how this law is working unless we gather the data about the incidences that occur and how they're being dealt with. Many speakers talked about awareness raising, and that is really important, and government have said that they are taking this on and have put investment into this, but that needs to continue. Because we need to make sure that people understand how their dogs will react in that situation. There needs to be education for those using the country to make sure that they keep their dogs on a lead while out in the fields. And it may seem there's wide open spaces for their dogs to run, but they need to be very careful about what is being farmed in those fields. And it can also be dangerous. The cattle can actually turn on dogs and turn on their owners, and that can be absolutely terrifying, not only for the dog but the owner, and they could be putting their own lives at danger. So can I also welcome the policing of this and ensuring that it is Police Scotland's role to police this. It shouldn't be down to individual farmers. So I very much welcome the bill. I pay tribute to Emma Harper. I know it's not easy to bring forward a member's bill. There's a lot of hard work. So well done, and this will make a difference.
Thank you very much. And I now call on Peter Chapman, who is also making his final speech.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Let me remind the Chamber for the last time that my register of interest states that I am a member of a farming partnership. And as you say, Presiding Officer, it is the last time I need to say that, because most folks know that I am standing down from this place, and as such, I beg some latitude from you, Presiding Officer, in my closing remarks, and maybe for a wee bit more time. Firstly, I must address the issue of Emma Harper's Dogs Protection of Livestock Bill just debated. And I, of course, welcome this bill and the extra protection it gives our farmers from attacks on their livestock by out-of-control dogs. Emma deserves a great deal of credit for successfully driving this bill to completion before recess, and I have no doubt it will become law at decision time. And normally I would say much more, but as this bill has cross-party support, and as this is my final speech, I would like to cover some other issues which are important to me. So, Deputy Presiding Officer, it is important that I say thank you to the many folk who have supported me these last 5 years. My loyal staff, both here and in my Aberdeen office, have been tremendous. But so have all the people who sometimes get forgotten, but make such a difference to our lives and our ability to do our jobs. I'm talking about those folks in Spice, our committee clerks and their teams, the IT support staff, the security staff, the canteen workers, human resources, allowances, etc., etc. The list goes on and on. And they all, without fail, do their jobs professionally, politely, and with a smile. They are a great bunch of people, and they should be proud of their dedication to doing their best. But how I wish I could be equally complimentary about other people and other things that goes on in this place. Of course I cannot, because there is something, in my opinion, sinister and worrying going on here, which is undermining the very credibility of this Parliament. And it is unfortunately being perpetrated by the SNP, the very party that likes to tell us we should respect Parliament. We have a First Minister determined to hang on to power, a First Minister who we know has misled Parliament, a First Minister who, if she had a shred of self-awareness or honour, would already have resigned. But she won't. Donald Dewar, our first Minister,
can I stop you, Mr. Chapman? There's a little disorder in the chamber, but I would encourage you to confine your remarks to the usual finishing remarks in a final speech. Mr. Chapman.
I hear what you say, Presiding Officer, but as I say, some of these issues are, to my mind, very important, and I would wish to make the points as I have stated. As I say, Donald Dewar as a man must be turning in his grave to see the damage this administration has done to the integrity and the standing of our Parliament. A Parliament which was launched with such high expectations that we would do politics better. The Sturgeon Salmon scandal has discredited our Parliament and highlighted a fatal weakness in our inability to hold the party in power to account. We have seen this SNP administration willfully ignore a series of votes which it has lost, and willfully ignore requests for information which at the outset was promised by our First Minister to the investigating committee. Democracy is a fragile flower, and without proper scrutiny and the ability to hold a government to account, our very democracy is at risk. Presiding Officer, this administration is mired in scandal and failure on many fronts, none more serious than the decline in our education system, a system once the envy of the world, which after 14 years of SNP rule is but a shadow of its former self. Nicola Sturgeon has said on many occasions to judge her on education, well, First Minister, we have, and you have failed miserably. But, Presiding Officer, on a lighter note, one of the most memorable speeches I have delivered in the last 5 years was the een I did in my own northeast tongue, the Doric. When I put it on the Facebook, it went viral, and I've had about 270,000 hits by all over the world. And that just goes to show how important the Scots language is to so many folk, and how important it is to our heritage and our culture. I would love to see our Scots language put in an equal footing with Gaelic and get the same level of support and funding as Gaelic gets. In my mind, it's just as important. It would be great if the many fantastic poems, for instance, written in the Doric, could be taught in schools. But thankfully, our Doric won't be forgotten when I leave, because Mark Finlater is fecht in the Banff-and-Buchan seat instead of me, and he's a native speaker and just as passionate about it as I am. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, I have only had 5 years in my role as an MSP, and it has been a great experience, and I have made many new friends. But I leave, frankly, disillusioned with what this place has become and concerned for the future of my country. Another 5 years of an SNP administration with an overall majority and without the ability to hold it to account fills me with dread. And another divisive independence referendum is the last thing this country needs just now. And I passionately hope that we can stop that happening, and I promise I will be doing my bit up to election day to return as many Conservative NSPs as possible. Because, Presiding Officer, a balanced Parliament will be a better Parliament. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
I now call Rosanna Cunningham And Cabinet Secretary, this is also your last speech. So,
thank you, Presiding Officer. On the last day of this current Parliament, it does seem fitting that we are considering a Members' Bill that has strong cross-party support and addresses a matter of serious concern to everyone with an interest in animal welfare. And I warmly congratulate my colleague Emma Harper on her successful initiative. Improving the lives of Scotland's animals is something to which I am strongly committed, despite having to deal with the extreme pressures of EU exit and the COVID pandemic. This government has still been able to deliver many groundbreaking and innovative improvements in this area, and I'm therefore happy to commend this bill to the Chamber. Presiding Officer, as you've indicated, this will be my last speech in this Chamber. Well, I should say my last in my elected capacity. This time comes to all of us, sometimes without warning, so I count myself very lucky to have been able to make the decision to retire at a time of my own choosing. I do confess to the occasional bewildering thought, quite how did it come to this? As a 15-year-old living in Australia, I wrote to the SNP in 1967 after the Hamilton by-election, and they wrote back, and I still have the package of booklets and leaflets. A little out of date now, perhaps. Approximately 5 minutes later, or so it seems, I'm standing here making a valedictory speech in a Scottish Parliament. And it has been the most extraordinary experience, a great privilege, and of course, a matter of some pride. Only the achievement of independence itself will top this for me. Now, and I say this in the spirit I would have hoped all valedictory speeches were said. Not everyone knows this, but in the early years of this Parliament, there was an informal cross-party backbench dining group. In those years, some enduring friendships emerged. For example, John Scott. John was an active diner, and he will remember the great fun we had. The ease with which he and I have been able to negotiate our way through some tricky policy issues in the intervening years is, I suspect, a consequence of that early period. Tavish Scott, who of course has left us in this term, was also an enthusiastic diner. And when Liam MacArthur was elected, Tavish pulled him into the same relationship, usually assisted by Prosecco, it has to be said, although Liam's cross-chamber texts aren't quite as wicked as Tavish's were. And I also have to apologise to Anas Sarwar. Pre-lockdown, I said I would make him a rhubarb and ginger cake, which I have singularly failed to deliver, thereby allowing him to say with authority that nationalists don't keep their promises. There are many others I could have named, members who were here in the early years but have left before this, but the point I'm making is, I hope, clear, that the capacity to forge relationships in this place should not be confined within party groups. And now I want to say a huge thank you to all who have worked for me over the years, up to and including my current constituency staff, Emma, Carol, Sheena, and of course Callum, who has been with me from the very start. I want to also thank all the officials and staff, both parliamentary and government, who've supported me, and that includes innumerable members of my various private offices over the last 12 years. And can I make a special shout out to all of the wonderful government car drivers who provide ministers with mobile offices and/or decompression chambers on a regular basis. Most of all, of course, thanks and abiding love to all of my amazing SNP colleagues throughout these years. Everyone from the best First Minister Scotland has ever had, I first met her when she was 17 years old, to all the newer members who came in after 2016. But I have special words for my very good and long-time pal John Swinney, who can't be in the chamber today. He was 19 when I first met him. We have been the Perthshire double act for so long that it seems strange to bring it to a close. And this is where, of course, I make the point that Perthshire is the most beautiful part of Scotland. But I sneaked into the House of Commons a few years before him, and I'm sneaking out of the Scottish Parliament some years before him too. He has been a friend and often confidant for decades, throughout which we have fought for and continue to fight for independence for Scotland. That's what motivated the 15-year-old me and is what motivates me still. Presiding Officer, I believe I'm right in saying that I am currently the longest-serving parliamentary representative in Scotland. When I leave, I pass the baton to John, and I wish him so well in the next years of this career. And with that, Presiding Officer, I bid this chamber farewell.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. And I now call on Emma Harper to respond to and wind up the debate.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. In closing, I do have additional people to thank. More than 600 people responded to my consultation in full, and I appreciate the time and input from the members of the public. And many organisations have been involved too, including the National Sheep Association for Scotland, and Claudia Beamish mentioned Jen Craig earlier. Jen has been helpful giving evidence to the committee, but also away from committee, and prior chair of the Sheep Association, John File too. The National Farmers Union in Scotland, the Scottish SPCA, the Scottish Farmers, Scottish Land Estates, Nature Scot, Scottish Gamekeepers Association, Dogs Trust, One Kind, Scottish Outdoor Access Network, Kennel Club, Blue Cross and many others. I do want to give special thanks to Chief Inspector Alan Drawn, who's the National Rural Crime Officer, and his team, including Willie Johnston and Alan McKean for Dumfries, and also PC John Cowan from Dumfries and Galloway Police Force also. The support from Spark has been phenomenal. Their knowledge and input has been greatly received. And during the debate, I welcome what Minister Ben McPherson says about what he has announced about a modernised statutory framework for livestock we're in, and a simple protocol that it would help support veterinarians in their work as well. So that is welcome today. I do agree with Colin Smith that prevention and education is key, and like the government's responsible owner advice that I've been seeing on the internet in the last few days, we know that increase in awareness is also what needs to be done to accompany this bill. But Police Scotland did say that the current law doesn't provide sufficient deterrent that could influence an owner to act with greater responsibility. And Christine Graham said that, nobody takes their dog out with an intent to attack sheep or alpacas or llamas or buffalo or whatever livestock is in our Scottish fields these days. But I do want to thank everyone who spoke in this Stage 3 debate. Jamie Halcro Johnston, I appreciate your amendment at Stage 2, and we just needed to tweak it a wee bit today. Also, Clare Adamson spoke, and Mike Rumbles and John Finney. I wish you both well for the future, as this was your last contributions today. The work will continue, and we know that the Scottish Partnership Against Rural Crime are now continuing to engage, and SRUC have technology that is a sheep Fitbit that can alert farmers when livestock are disturbed. So it doesn't just stop here. And I do welcome Rosanna Cunningham has closed this debate on behalf of the Government with her valedictory speech. I'm again chuffed that it is for my bill. And I want to thank... Of course I will.
Gail Ross.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I think it would be remiss of me not to personally thank Emma Harper for all the hard work that she's put into this bill. It's a fitting end to our parliamentary session, and I have been privileged to work with her on this. So thank you on behalf of people like Joyce Campbell and Sally Crowe, and from all the constituents in my constituency of Caithness, Sutherland and Ross.
Emma Harper.
Thanks, Gail. That is very fitting that you mentioned Sally, and and Joyce, because I know that they will be very keen to hear that we will pass this bill tonight, I hope. And so, again, I thank everyone who has contributed to this legislation to support our farmers, Joyce and Sally, and our other farmers in Dumfries and Galloway as well. Support our farmers and crofters with this updated legislation to protect livestock and support responsible access to our bonny countryside when folk are out with their dogs. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much, Ms Harper, and we'll move on in a moment to the next item of business.
Thank you, colleagues. The next item of business is moving to the vote on the bill. But before I do so, I'm actually going to suspend for a few moments for a technical break to allow members to access the voting app. Hopefully not for 5 minutes, but I'm going to suspend for a few moments to allow us to access the voting app. Parliament is suspended. Thank you, colleagues. We are now back in session, and so we're going to go straight to the vote. The question is that motion 24270, in the name of Emma Harper, on the Dogs Protection of Livestock Amendment Scotland Bill be agreed, and members may cast their votes now. This will be a 1-minute division. That vote is now closed. Please let me know if you were not able to vote. Thank you. The result of the vote on motion 24270 in the name of Emma Harper is yes 120. There were no votes against, there were no abstentions. The motion is agreed and the Dogs Protection of Livestock Scotland Bill is passed. Thank you. I'm now just going to hand the chair to my Deputy Presiding Officer, Linda Fabiani, to chair the next item.
Hello again, everyone. And the next item of business is consideration of motion 24442 in the name of Nicola Sturgeon on a motion of thanks. So just to let everyone know, all our party leaders will speak in this debate and then we will take a vote. And I hope our last vote of the session will be a unanimous one. However, I'm going to take advantage of my position in the chair. Oh, I should have said, we'll take a vote, but you've not to run off because we'll have a few words from our esteemed presiding officer at that point. But I'm going to take advantage of my position here just now. Last time I'll be able to speak in this chamber as an elected member. Just to thank the lovely people of East Kilbride for having given me the opportunity to represent that fine town for so many years. East Kilbride, of course, was once known as Scotland's most successful new town, but it has a very bright future in its older age as smart, sustainable East Kilbride. It's been an absolute honour and a privilege over the last 20+ years to work both in East Kilbride and to work here in our Parliament, and it's brought me much joy in both places. So thank you, all of you. Thank you very much. And as I said, we are considering motion 24442 in the name of Nicola Sturgeon on a motion of thanks. Would all those who wish to speak in the debate, and we know who they are, so don't be chancing your luck here, press your request to speak buttons. And I call on Nicola Sturgeon to speak to and move the motion for around 4 minutes, please, First Minister.
Deputy Presiding Officer, let me begin by paying tribute to you. You have been an outstanding representative for your constituents in East Kilbride. You've been a wonderful Deputy Presiding Officer and you've been a great friend, and I wish you all the best in your retirement from this chamber. I want to begin today by acknowledging and doing so with great appreciation the work of all MSPs across this session. And I think particularly over the past 12 months, amidst the stresses of the last year, MSPs have served constituents, scrutinised government decisions and passed legislation that will benefit Scotland for the future. And all of that and more has been done in circumstances that none of us could have imagined 5 years ago. Indeed, none of us could have imagined even just 1 year ago. My thanks go to everyone. I want to pay particular tribute, though, to the 34 MSPs from right across this chamber who are standing down at the election. Amongst them are former party leaders, cabinet secretaries, committee conveners and ministers. 4 of them, Jean Freeman, Mike Russell, Rosanna Cunningham and Aileen Campbell, are members of the current cabinet. On a personal level, I want to thank each and every one of them for their service. Rosanna Cunningham, who has just made a wonderful valedictory speech, is one of my oldest and dearest friends, as is Mike Russell. Just as they met me when I was very young, I first met Aileen Campbell when she was very young. And let me say, I really do hope we see Aileen Campbell back in frontline politics in the future. She is a rare talent and has got a great contribution still to make. And Jean Freeman, well, Jean Freeman and I have spent more time in each other's company over the past year than either of us have done with our own partners. She has been an outstanding health secretary, but to me over the last year she has been an absolute rock. I couldn't have got through it without you. My grateful, heartfelt thanks to you. Each of the 34 MSPs, though, has served their constituents and this Parliament with distinction, and I really do sincerely and genuinely wish each and every one of you all of the very best for the future. Our presiding officer, of course, is one of the MSPs standing down, and one of the 13 MSPs standing down who was elected to the first Parliament in 1999. We are indeed beginning to feel like an endangered species. Over the past 5 years as presiding officer, Ken has led Parliament through quite exceptional circumstances, from the Brexit referendum to the trials and tribulations of COVID, but his willingness to innovate and respond to changing needs has served all of us well. Remote sittings and voting were necessitated by circumstances we would never have envisaged 5 years ago, but they may, I hope, have an enduring value. I'm conscious that 3 members leaving this place are doing so because they found that Parliament had a detrimental impact on family and personal life. I hope that the innovations that have resulted from COVID can be used to make sure that no MSP in the future feels that they have to make that choice. And if so, that would be a fine legacy for our presiding officer. Ken, thank you for your service, and all of us wish you well. Now, I know that Ken would want me to point out that he has been ably assisted at all times by our Parliament's staff and indeed by his deputy presiding officers. And I want to add my personal thanks to our Parliament staff. This has been a difficult period because of COVID, obviously, but also because of some other difficult issues that I wish they hadn't had to deal with over the past number of months. Our Parliament staff have done a superb job, all of them. Clerking teams, broadcasting, the official report, security, catering staff, our posties. I've just been told Jimmy the postman is retiring in a week's time, and let's thank him for all of his service too. But to each and every one of you, you keep us going and you have kept us safe, and we are deeply grateful to you. I, as I'm sure we all do, want to put on record my thanks to my constituency office staff, and personally and on behalf of government colleagues, I want to place on record my thanks to the civil service and to my private office in particular, who are a source of never-ending support. You know, the last year has shown that this chamber is the place people look to in times of crisis. It's the place that people expect to respond to their needs, hopes and dreams. In the past 5 years, in immensely difficult circumstances, MSPs from all parties have risen to the challenges. This has been one of the busiest sessions since 1999, and I know I'm running out of time, but as well as dealing with COVID and Brexit, this Parliament has passed our first ever social security bill, incorporated the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, established a Scottish National Investment Bank and passed climate legislation which will see us become a net zero nation. I don't think that is a bad legacy at all for this session of Parliament. When the new Parliament reconvenes in May, it will be renewed by fresh faces, fresh thinking and new attitudes. I think we should all listen to Rosanna Cunningham's words of wisdom about the value of forging friendships across party boundaries. But the new Parliament will be able to build on this Parliament's legacy. For those MSPs who return, I hope that's a spur to further progress. But for the 34 MSPs who are standing down, it should be an enduring sense of pride. This Parliament is grateful to all of them for their service, and I want to convey my deep thanks and appreciation to each and every one of them. And with those words, Presiding Officer and Deputy Presiding Officer, it is with great pleasure that I move today's motion in my name.
Call Ruth Davidson for around 3 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And I'd like to put on record my support for the support of the Scottish Conservatives for the First Minister's motion today, and to wish you well as you retire from Holyrood. While I'm not a class of 99er like the Presiding Officer or the First Minister, I have been here for over a decade, first as staff and then as an elected member for both Glasgow and for Edinburgh Central. Most of that time I was leading my party, and one of the many misunderstandings about being an opposition leader is that you actually have much to do with a Presiding Officer. Aside from small talk at ceremonies and line-ups and receptions, there's maybe only half a dozen sit-down meetings a year, and that's it. So it wasn't until after I stepped down from the leadership and was elected onto the corporate body that I actually really saw the full responsibility of the office and the immense work that you, Ken, and the top team do. And what an extraordinary time to be involved. When COVID hit and the first lockdown was announced, to watch you and David and Michelle and the team transition Holyrood from a campus where up to 1,800 people could be present on the average sitting day of the average year, to a legislature that could still function with barely 100 on site. And how flappable you were, and how with your even-handed nature you were absolutely insistent that those who were needed in here would be protected, and those who were required to work from home or be furloughed would be supported. From clerks to civil servants to IT to cleaners to mailroom staff to security, plus the catering, facilities management, reception, the guide to the creche, everybody, whether they were staff or contractors or subcontractors, they would be supported, both practically and financially. And the Parliament would use its might to ensure that other companies that held contracts here would behave ethically too. We would see our people right, just as they see us right every day. And I was proud of us as an employer, and that stemmed from your leadership. I was slightly perturbed, however, when you confided with the SBCB on a Teams call that despite all 6 of your children returning home for lockdown, you were welcoming a new arrival. And I was delighted when you brought your new puppy onto the call as well. Presiding Officer, in the last 10 years, I have often pushed my luck when it comes to speaking time, and I'm going to beg your indulgence today, because this is also my last speech to Parliament. I don't know if it's ever been mentioned that I'm not standing at this election. There are many thanks that I have to bring forward. My office staff down the years, Laurie, Andrea, Nick, Dan, Ben, Ed and Elaine, the close team that supported me as leader, Eddie, Adam, Marek and Kevin, Mark McInnes and his team at Central Office, and of course my colleagues in Parliament. As the only new Tory elected in 2011 and catapulted to the leadership within 6 months, I will always be grateful to that 2011 group for all that they taught me. And after that great night when we doubled our number, the team that came in here in 2016 will always be my team. From both, we are losing good servants from this Parliament: Margaret Mitchell, Adam Tompkins, Alison Harries, Peter Chapman, Tom Mason, Bill Bowman. And of course, we lost the last of our class of 99. Earlier this term with the passing of Alex Johnston, a big broth of a man with a personality to match. But I'd also like to thank those from other parties who've extended the hand of friendship down the years. The incorrigible gossip of Alex Neil, the lycra dash of Willie Rennie as he passed the office when we shared a floor, and the affectionate chastisement of Johann Lamont, my Labour auntie, who calmed my wilder outbursts during the referendum period in Better Together. Also, Jenny Mara, who came in the same intake as me, where our occasional catch-ups down the years migrated from wine and Chinese to a lovely playdate between Adam, Sydney and Finn last summer between lockdowns. She'll be a miss to this Parliament, which, given her loss and the loss of others, such as Gail Ross and Ailey Campbell, likes to talk the talk on being family-friendly, but perhaps needs to rethink how it chooses to walk the walk. For my own part, I will miss this place. When I announced in August 2019 that I was standing down as leader and wouldn't seek re-election, I always knew leaving would be a wrench. It is so consuming. It's not just the sitting days, but everything else that goes along with it that is so absorbing, but which also makes it hard to carve out proper time for the ones you love. I don't know how you manage with 6 kids, Presiding Officer, as I am run ragged by 1. But I am looking forward to a change of working practice. One where, when I'm away for a few days a week, it will be hard to be away, but when I'm home, to be properly present with Jen and Finn, well, that is going to mean worlds. So thank you, Ken, for all you've done as presiding officer. My warmest regards to all the returners and my very best wishes to all 33 other members who are standing down. I support the motion in the First Minister's name.
Call Anna Sarwar for around 3 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And can I support the motion in the First Minister's name and echo her comments about yourself, Linda Fabiani, is a fierce but kind politician who I've had the pleasure of spending the last 5 years with. Lots of nice gossips and chats along the way. I want to also pay tribute to all those MSPs from across the chamber who are entering either new challenges or going on to, I hope, a happy and peaceful retirement. For my part, I want to say a particular thank you to my own colleagues, Ian Gray, Johann Lamont, Elaine Smith, Lewis MacDonald, Jenny Mara, Dave Stewart, Mary Fee and Neil Finlay, who are stepping down from our benches. Each and every one of them has made an enormous contribution to this Parliament and to public life. They have represented the very best of our party and, more importantly, the best of our country. 4 of our retirees are from the 99 intake, 5 if you include the presiding officer himself. And while I'm sure they won't thank me for saying it, it is a testament to the length of service representing the Scottish people that you all entered the Parliament before I was even old enough to vote. There are, of course, members retiring across. Sorry, First Minister, that includes yourself as well. I can see the glare I'm getting from the First Minister there. I imagine I'll get a few more over the coming weeks. There are, of course, members retiring from across different parties, and too many to mention individually, but each and every single one of them with their own achievements. But I want to recognise 2 parliamentarians in other political parties. First of all, Ruth Davison, who is having her last day in this chamber today. I can genuinely say that I like her as a human being and as a friend, someone who is good company and someone who is undoubtedly a conviction politician who has been a key personality and figure in Scottish public life for the last decade. She will be a great loss to this chamber, and her successor has a very, very hard act to follow. And the other one is our Health Secretary, Jean Freeman. Spending your last year in Parliament as the Health Secretary during a pandemic can hardly be described as easing yourself into retirement. I know I've been challenging at times with the Cabinet Secretary, particularly around all things around the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital, but I can't thank her enough for the openness and the kindness she has shown throughout. And so I do pay tribute to her and thank her for that. And I know all the families thank her for that also. Finally, Presiding Officer, I wish to pay tribute to you. You have presided over the most turbulent period in our Parliament's relatively short history. You and your team have kept our Parliament running amidst the largest national crisis since the Second World War. And for that, you and your team deserve a huge, huge amount of credit. You generally are one of the nicest people in politics. There are still nice people in politics, and you prove that. You have been unflappable and kind as we change to our new environment around COVID. I can only imagine how you keep your cool, as a number of our colleagues have struggled to either log in or to vote through the period, being unflappable throughout, and understanding and patient as we learn our new environment. And you've also been a reforming presiding officer, opening up our Parliament, opening up for opportunities for people from the backbenches and opposition, and offering greater scrutiny as a result. But more importantly, on a personal note, it has been a pleasure. You are someone I am proud to call a friend as well as a colleague. And Jackie Bailey was informing me at First Minister's question today that you share a birthday with her. And surprisingly, she tells me that you're actually older than her, which is going to get me in trouble myself. But also you have tenaciously represented the good people of Eastwood and the west of Scotland, and I'm sure all of them would want to thank you for all your efforts over the years. And as a father of 6 children, it's hard to imagine you'll have a quiet retirement, but can I say, for the sake of your wife, I hope you finally have a Netflix account. And in closing, can I thank you and all the parliamentary staff for all the immense work they have done over this 5-year period. To the Chief Executive, to all the staff from top to bottom, thank you so much for everything, and we hope to return after the 6th of May and say thank you again. Thank you.
I now call Willie Rennie for around 3 minutes, please.
The most unfortunate juxtaposition. I have to say I've found the most rewarding moments of this Parliament when we have put aside the usual tensions and knuckled down to make life better. And I think the pandemic over the last year has forced us to do exactly that. And I have found working with various ministers and other members of this Parliament particularly rewarding, being able to fix problems that are all new to us for the betterment of our constituents and the country. I want to praise the enormous efforts of the parliamentary staff, especially the cleaners and the security staff, but also wish to commend the patience of particularly the IT staff and putting up with our endless grumbles about various bits of the voting system. But the Chief Executive and all his support staff for opening and closing this Parliament at a moment's notice, including disrupting their Christmas and their New Year. I think they deserve a particular appreciation for what they've put up with over the last year. To you, Presiding Officer, your genial, generous style has been, I think, extraordinary in the last year. You have been unflappable, and I think despite the pressure that you've been under, I think you've done the job proud, and I think you've done yourself proud as well. To my constituency staff in the parliamentary pool, they have been exceptional. To be honest, I don't know how they put up with me. I too want to mention Alex Johnston, who, when I first entered this Parliament, he was just along the corridor from me, and I still miss his thunderous laughter, banging the table with Jim in hoots and howls for hours on end. He was just such a joy to be around and was my one-man cheerleader in the last parliamentary term. So I will always miss Alex. To my colleague, Mike Rumbles, there are many occasions, in fact, many occasions, where we have disagreed and voted in different ways. But I have to say, through all of that time, despite my blood pressure on occasions, his challenge has been invaluable. Because often, I know we don't want to admit it, but often Mike Rumbles is right. I'm just pleased that on the very last day we managed to vote together in exactly the same way. To those retiring, I am sure there is a bit in all of us that is a little bit jealous and are attracted by the potential time that is going to open up in your life, hours that you did not know existed in the day. And to those wishing to return, I do wish you well in the campaign trail. I wish you have fun and a rewarding time in that election campaign, because democracy can be a very beautiful thing. Thank you.
And finally, I call Alison Johnston. Again, around 3 minutes, please.
Thank you. I'd like to begin by associating myself with colleagues' remarks. My thanks to Linda Fabiani, and I too fondly remember working with Alex Johnston in committee. I'm pleased to support the motion in the name of the First Minister. When this session began in 2016, we couldn't have imagined that it would end a year into a pandemic and the day after a National Day of Reflection to remember all those who have lost their lives. On behalf of my Green colleagues, I thank each and every member of staff in this Parliament, from our cleaners to catering staff, to security staff, the mailroom staff, the chamber desk and beyond, and of course our own staff, who we work with day in, day out. The Scottish Government has had to respond to the unprecedented challenge of the pandemic, and this Parliament has worked hard to scrutinise their response. By and large, that scrutiny has been constructive, and the Government has accepted it as such. Many colleagues in Parliament and in Government responsible for this important work aren't seeking re-election, and I pay tribute to colleagues across the chamber who are standing down today. Many of these colleagues were elected to Parliament in 1999. Well, I have learned a great deal from all of you, what to do and, on the rare occasion, what not to do. But I thank you all and I wish you all the very best for the future. I'm so pleased to be in a position today to thank my dear colleague John Finney for his work, his wisdom, his hospitality and his great chat. John Finney's legislation to afford children in Scotland the same legal protection from assault as we adults enjoy is one of the most important pieces of legislation passed by the Parliament in this session. The incorporation of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child is a significant step that we should celebrate, and we must build on this work to protect and respect the human rights of children and young people in Scotland. They have been remarkable during the pandemic. They've engaged with this Parliament, calling for action on the climate and nature emergencies. And I'm proud too that the Parliament can learn from the collective wisdom of the Citizens' Assembly. Of course, the presiding officer is one of the class of 1999, standing down today. In this role, Ken McIntosh's determination to enable and improve scrutiny has made a great difference. His drive to ensure that more members from across the chamber are better able to represent their constituents and afforded greater opportunity to hold the government to account has borne fruit. This is an important legacy, and this work mustn't be seen as finished. So it seems wholly appropriate that a presiding officer with a strong and genuine commitment to ensuring that more voices are heard was the bearer of this office at a time when our ways of carrying on business were transformed almost overnight. He has calmly, courteously, and when required, firmly guided this chamber through this session and this most challenging of years, chairing hybrid sessions with ease, even when our IT skills make this difficult. And his calm, when this chamber was momentarily plunged into darkness, was remarkable. He did not miss a beat. From time to time, I've had the pleasure of bumping into the presiding officer at tennis events across the country. But while we both enjoy tennis, it's fair to say that the presiding officer's family deem him a worthy partner in competitive doubles events. While Ken McIntosh isn't seeking re-election, I know that the years ahead of him will be action-packed. His family will see to that, as will the many other interests that call upon his attention. With colleagues across the chamber, I thank Ken McIntosh for his service. He leaves Parliament with the very best and warmest wishes of the Scottish Green Party. Thank you.
That concludes the debate on the motion of thanks, and we will move right on to decision time. There's one question to be put as a result of the business that we have just heard, and that is that motion 24442 in the name of Nicola Sturgeon on a motion of thanks be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. That is a relief. The motion is therefore agreed, and decision time is concluded, but I would very much like now, please, to hand you over to our presiding officer, Mr. Ken McIntosh.
Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, first of all, Richard Lyle, for voting for that motion single-handedly. It has been some weeks, so before I go any further, can I just say to you, rest easy. I am not going to use my remarks to settle old scores, real or imaginary. Despite encouragement, I may say so, from some mischievous colleagues amongst us, I'm here simply to thank you. In fact, I've got so many people to thank that I'm a bit of a quandary as to how to go about it. Those of us stepping down from Parliament today, and I'm so grateful to the party leaders for naming them all, because there are literally too many for me to list. Those stepping down will be full of emotion, as I am today. But for those of you who want me to go full Gwyneth Paltrow at the Oscars, can I just say that I am far too buttoned up to do that. Although having said that, both Ruth Davidson and Willie Rennie mentioning the passing of Alex Johnston tested me. I was also bringing to mind my predecessor, Alex Ferguson, and I heard from both their widows very kind letters in the last few weeks, and I'd just like to say how much we still grieve their passing. But what has struck me over the last few weeks was how many powerful and moving valedictory speeches there have been from colleagues who are also leaving at this election, just this afternoon from Rosanna Cunningham, from Aileen Campbell and more. So I thought I would ask fellow members for your suggestions as to who and what to thank today. And I want to begin by thanking you all for being such good-looking and handsome colleagues. Good-looking and handsome, yes, it's definitely true. It may not be the first quality or attribute I would have singled out, but can I thank Alex Cole-Hamilton for that selfless suggestion? Alongside a bit pointed, is it? Alongside our public servants, I've also been asked to thank the marvellous men and women of the 2nd Platoon Black Watch 3rd Battalion of the Royal Regiment of Scotland, and that suggestion from Maurice Corrie, of course. Mike Rumbles, Alec Neil and Oliver Mundell asked me to pass on their thanks to the party whips. I think the thanks was in inverted commas. And 2 final, rather election-focused requests. One from James Kelly asking if it is too late for me to shout at him and have him thrown out of the chamber. And another from Anas Sawar saying, things are worse than I thought. Could you use your powers and delay the election by a month or 2? Well, can I thank you for your indulgence, colleagues? After the past few days, I wasn't sure that we'd be on speaking terms, let alone able to laugh with each other. And I really am grateful to you all. When we all stood here in the well of this chamber some 5 years ago with our hands raised to swear an oath of office, looking forward with excitement and anticipation to what may lay ahead, little did we know that in a matter of weeks the Brexit referendum would change the political landscape and dominate our agenda for the next 4 years, itself only to be overtaken by the global pandemic that has devastated our economy, bringing grief and misery to many tens of thousands of fellow Scots. And it's only natural in these circumstances to feel frustrated, thwarted even. But I want to thank you for what you have achieved despite as well as because of the circumstances. I want to thank you for the families that you have helped, the children with additional support that each of you here will have fought for, the care for those with dementia that you will all have witnessed at first hand. I often feel that the greatest privilege an MSP have is being invited into people's lives, being asked to share in someone's difficulties, to know the upset and unfairness that they are wrestling with. To be asked for our help, even if we can't solve their problems, is reward in itself. Not that the voters will necessarily tell you that over the next few weeks. You're more likely to be cynically portrayed as in it for yourselves. But I know how hard you work, how committed you are to your constituents. I thought Bruce Crawford had it right when he said it was all about service. Now, Bruce, who served this Parliament with distinction in nearly every capacity, who actually I often think of as the best presiding officer we never had. But yes, here in Parliament, politics can be a robust business, confrontational even. But even in the midst of our difficulties over recent weeks, colleagues have come together around the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, the Redress Bill, domestic abuse. And I think it worth remembering that most of what we do achieve, we achieve by working together. I don't just mean across party lines. I mean, for example, the teamwork that is there at the heart of a constituency office. For most of us, I imagine there will be 3 or 4 people who get everything done. If you want to be an accessible and caring MSP, if you want to sound intelligent and knowledgeable, that will be because your office manager, your researcher and your caseworker are caring and accessible. They are intelligent and knowledgeable. And can I just say to my constituency team, in fact, on your behalf, to all the staff working for us in every part of Scotland right now, thank you for everything you do and for at least trying to make us look good. And I want to extend that appreciation to everyone who works here in Holyrood too. Most of us will know how committed, approachable and diligent our staff at Parliament are. But as presiding officer, I've had the opportunity to see that in spades. In fact, I've been doubly blessed as, alongside my constituency staff, I have a private office who look after me in Edinburgh, and I genuinely cannot thank them enough for all they do. I was going to name and pay tribute to the many individuals, departments and services that we have here at the Parliament. I noticed several colleagues try to do that, but as soon as you begin to name one department, I'm just conscious of the many departments that I can't go on to list. What I do know is that as MSPs, we may unfortunately come and go, but the parliamentary service, under the exemplary leadership of our Chief Executive, David McGill, is there to support us in all circumstances. They remain committed to the principles of accessibility, of openness, of transparency, of sharing power with the people of Scotland. And when I think of how this Parliament has grown to take its place at the centre of public life in Scotland, so much of that is founded on the effort, the enthusiasm and the dedication of our parliamentary staff, and I, for one, owe them an enormous debt of gratitude. And my final thanks should, of course, be to my family. But I hope you will excuse me. They've already had several mentions. I hope you'll excuse me if, as I know they will, that if I do that privately. None of us could achieve anything in politics without the support and the understanding of our family. But I promised earlier not to choke up, and I wouldn't be able to do that if I did my family justice. So I will speak to them later. So, colleagues, it can be difficult in any one session to see what you have achieved. But for those of us who have been here 22 years, and I include the First Minister, I include my fantastic and supportive Deputy Presiding Officers in this Parliament and the joint efforts of everyone who has served here has changed Scotland. We've changed from a country with the worst cancer record in Europe to the first in the UK to ban smoking. We've changed from battle to repeal the prejudice of Section 2A to one where we celebrate the Pride March leaving the doors of this very institution. From a country scarred by sectarian division to one where the Scottish Muslim community provides us with the Cabinet Secretary for Justice and the leader of the Scottish Labour Party. There is so much more to do, and there will be more frustration, but I have no doubt whatsoever that Scotland is undoubtedly a more diverse, a more tolerant and a more self-confident country because of this Parliament and because of the work that everyone here does. When I bang my gavel shortly, it will be not just to end the session and to say thank you to all of those who are stepping down. It will mark the start of an election campaign and to wish good luck to all of you who are standing again. And I will be here on the 13th of May to welcome you back, alongside perhaps 40 or 50 new faces, refreshed, reinvigorated, ready to work together for the benefit of our country. And for that, most of all, I want to thank you all. I close this session of Parliament.
What distinguishes Broadcasting Scotland from a website or blog, apart from our brilliant programmes?
Hi there, I'm Gordon Ross.
Are the costs we face to enable us to produce those programmes. These costs are significant and ongoing. However, our facilities are able to do so much more if only we had the staff. In the last year, some of our supporters have cancelled their subscriptions. In one way, we would prefer it if it was because they didn't like us, rather than it being because of the financial pressures which we are all under because of COVID. The really positive outcome of our fundraiser is that at a time of economic challenge in Scotland, we will use your donations to create jobs and in a small way contribute to improving the Scottish economy. If you want us to be Scotland's independent broadcaster, able to provide an alternative mainstream television platform, then please support us.
Scotland is going to be an independent country.
Just imagine what we could do if we had even 1% of the BBC Scotland channel's budget. Imagine. And then please consider turning your imagination into reality. Please support us if you can afford it.